Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah Ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'll be talking about Robyn Young's 2006 novel Brethren with Tegan Robinson. Hi!
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm great.
So yeah, welcome. And do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and why you selected this particular book?
Oh, I chose this book, I read it when I was 16, so back in probably 2006 when it came out. I wonder if I bought it new. That's very odd for me. I usually buy used books. But I picked it up because I was in a phase where I wanted to know more about Templars, but didn't really know where to go to get the information because, Google really wasn't a thing,
right.
I think Ask Jeeves was the thing, which was a browser that I absolutely loved. And, there was nothing much in my library because I went to a public school. There wasn't anything much in there other than what they wanted to teach us. So I picked this up going, maybe I'll learn a little something, and I love fiction anyway. So that's where that came from. But I read it a lot. I think I read it probably 4 or 5 times, the whole series through, when I was between 16 and 18, and just loved it. But then reading it now is a very different experience. I didn't remember much from it when I was 16, because it was 13 years ago. That's when I started reading it. And so, my memory's terrible as it is anyway. But yeah, it's just the things that I remember about it from that time were very, very small portions of this book. And I was reading most of this book going, I don't remember any of this happening. I don't remember these people, these interactions. It was just it would have been just one chapter that I focused on. And when we get there, I'll talk about that. But yeah, that's when you invited me on the podcast, I was I was torn between this series, and there was another series about Mongols that I read. That's the kind of fiction historical book series, but I didn't really think that was in your purview, really.
I can do Mongols. You can come back and do that one.
Yeah. I do think this one is more interesting and dramatic. The Mongols one is a bit dry. I think I'll have to reread that before us going for an ep if we ever do that. But yeah, I remember liking this book a lot more than the Mongols one. But yeah, that's how I got into it. And yeah, I'm just a big book person, as the mountains of books that remain unread in my house would tell you. But
same.
I do love historical fiction, but I like it better when they get the history right instead of the fiction part.
Yeah, this would have come out, you said it's 2006, so this would have come out, I guess, when I was in early college, and because I'm a weirdo, I knew when I started college that I wanted to be a medieval historian. And so 2006, I would have been a sophomore, and I feel like that was the point already when I was increasingly having a hard time reading historical fiction about the Middle Ages, because I would read have a really hard time stepping back and not being oh, that's wrong.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I had more of a background in any type of historical education, I would be tearing this book apart, as you probably were as you were reading it, because it's no. No.
Yeah, and I will say there are things that, we'll get to this, there are things that she does definitely get right, but also things that not so much.
Yeah. I think she's very liberal with her use of the word historical fiction. Yes. The fiction's there, the history not so much.
Yeah, there are definitely moments where I'm you did your research, Robyn Young.
Yeah.
You sat down and you know some things, so good on you.
Yeah.
Which I don't always feel when I'm watching certain movies.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Robyn Young is an English historical fiction writer in general. And so this seems to have been, as far as I could tell, just Googling a bit, this seems to have been her first trilogy. It takes place during the ninth and final, essentially, Middle Eastern Crusade. And my guess, looking at the kind of things about the next couple of books, is that it must end more or less with spoiler alert, the destruction of the Templar Order in 1312.
I believe that's correct. I have the books right next to me because I was looking through them before, trying to find something. The last book is called Requiem, The Fall of the Templars.
Right.
So, yes, I believe that is probably, that would be the end of the book. But
they must fall.
It'll be very interesting to see what that's like.
And she's also written a trilogy on Robert the Bruce, who has shown up in a number of other podcast episodes, and now seems to be working on this series, which basically seems to be everything that happened in the 15th century in one book. So it has the Wars of the Roses, and it has the Medicis in Florence, and it has the court of Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain. So I'm curious as to how that actually gets tied together in a way that makes any sense. Who knows? But
yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't seen anything about her new novels yet. I'll have to check that out and see how that goes. Because I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that her writing has evolved past 2006 writing, because some of it's a bit like, quote unquote, of its time, and it's just, I'm really hoping she's grown up a little bit with her writing.
Yeah, and her prose is not awful, but it's also not elegant.
Yes. Our
first main section is the enumeratio, or recap section, where we go over basically the plot of the book. So I'm going to do a just brief orienting plot summary, and then we can get into more of the details. Will Campbell grows up as a sergeant in the Temple in London, with the goal of becoming a Knight Templar to follow in the footsteps of his estranged father. After tragedy strikes in Paris, he is forced to become the apprentice to the ill-tempered scholar monk Everard, and eventually begins an affair with Elwen, the niece of his late mentor. Everard eventually reveals to him that he belongs to a secret sect within the Knights Templar, the Anima Templi, whose goal is to reconcile the three faiths and bring peace to the Holy Land and the world. Best of luck with that. And he tasks William with recovering the Book of the Grail, the Anima Templi's seemingly heretical initiation book, from the hands of those who plot the downfall of the Templars, including the future King Edward I. William's story is told in parallel with the, mostly, true story of Baibars Bundukari, a Mamluk commander who becomes sultan and whose implacable hostility to Christians and military prowess proves an obstacle to the goals of both Christians seeking conquest and the Anima Templi. And we actually begin with Baibars, who is basically just portrayed as being this psychopath who hates Christians above all else.
Yeah, it's very rough in that first chapter because it's just, we're put right into the action. Like, there's no boring, like, once upon a time or, like, background. We're just like, bam, into a battle straight away. And you don't know what's going on, who these people are. And it takes, like, 4 or 5 pages to kind of, like, piece together, like, who the Sultan is and how Baybars kind of falls into the hierarchy of this army, and I like it, but then it's also like, whoa.
Yeah, I like the idea of kind of putting you into the action in that way. I think that's a cool strategy, but it definitely is also a lot, especially if you're not super familiar with the period.
Yeah.
So we have this battle, which is between the Mamluks and the Mongols, and the Mongols are defeated. However, he doesn't really seem to care about them. He really just seems to want to fight Christians, which seems to have something to do with his past, where at some point it seems like he was a slave. It seems like at some point he was a slave to Christians.
Yeah, they do allude to that in the chapter. Yeah. But they do explore that a little bit more later on. Yeah. But all we know at that point is he was a former slave. He's in this army. Somehow there's a little bit of a mystery surrounding his background at this point.
We then go to a completely different part of the world. And now all of a sudden we are in France. And so there's this thing, the Book of the Grail. We don't really know what it is, but like somebody clearly has stolen this book and is running around with this stolen book, and somebody's chasing him and he dies. And then the book then ends up in the hands of this wine merchant who doesn't know what it is because he can't read.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting smash cut to this chapter from the last chapter, because that was action-packed. At the end of the battle, they had won, we're being introduced to those characters, and then it's just some guy running down an alley being pursued by mystery men. And then and it was just like, whoa, what's happening? We've already just like jumped into the action, and now we're seeing more action. And I do love it. It's so interesting. And for books of it in 2006, you didn't really have a lot of that at the start. There was always like some meandering about who people were, and then the action came later. But yeah, it ends up in the hands of this wine merchant, and he stashes the Book of the Grail behind some barrels, I believe, and then takes off. And I was like, great, that's a super hiding place, right. But sure.
And then, yeah, like everybody who's searching for the book dies, and this merchant's like, oh, a book. That's cool looking.
Yeah, exactly. But he also can't read.
Right.
Like, this is my thing, is that shouldn't he be able to read in some respect?
Yeah.
You know, as a merchant, and like I don't know much about that time period, but I assume that he would be able to read things for his business. And so, I don't know, I don't recall if the Book of the Grail was in a different language on the front of it, and he was like, oh, there's a mystery book, cool. But I also don't know if books were that revered back in that time either.
He certainly would have known that a book would have been very expensive, at least. And especially my sense, based on the description of it, was that it was clearly a very kind of high-quality book in appearance, so he clearly would have known that this is an object of value, at least. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't make sense, as you said, like, it doesn't make sense that he couldn't read at all. If you're a merchant in the 13th century, and it even actually says he's poring over his account books. So if you're keeping accounts, like, you can read. And even if, I don't remember if it ever actually explicitly says this, but even if this Book of the Grail is in Latin, I mean, it certainly does not say it's in, like, Arabic or Hebrew, something where there's a completely unfamiliar alphabet. So my assumption is that it's supposed to be in Latin. And he at least would have been able to read the words. He might not have known exactly what it meant, but he would have been able to read the words, and especially because, French is a Romance language, he also probably would have been able to puzzle out some of what it probably was saying, or at least, like, what the title was.
Yeah. So that's, I guess, plot hole number one. It's just...
Yeah, so, and they clearly do that, I guess, I don't know, and I guess they just do that really to kind of make the point that people can't read in the Middle Ages, to be honest, so...
I guess. Is that how it usually was? Is that... for that time period, that people, like a majority, couldn't read?
Probably a majority couldn't, but I guess literacy is becoming increasingly common. And this is definitely a moment where people who are fairly well-off merchants, they probably mostly would have been able to do at least some basic reading in the vernacular. And so it's one of those things that is very much a stereotype of the Middle Ages, that nobody can read. And it feels like it's just playing too much into that stereotype without having kind of looked into the details of actually it kind of makes sense that this person should be able to read, and it's internally inconsistent that he is keeping account books, but he can't, like, read the title of a book.
Yeah, exactly. That's precisely what I thought when I read it this time around. When I was 16, didn't take any notice. I was like, oh yeah, sure. Fair enough. People don't know how to read in the 13th century. Right. Like, I had no concept of what happened in that era or anything like that.
Yeah. And that's probably, the assumption that she had about, like, her readers in general, is that they don't necessarily know that sort of things.
Yeah, and perhaps she played into that stereotype to kind of introduce us to, like, new readers who know nothing about medieval ages or anything going on. But is that giving her too much credit? I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, it's at the very least... It's clear to me that she kind of did research in some areas and didn't quite do research in other areas. And I would say in general, the kind of biggest area where I would say historical fiction writers tend to not do as much research as they should is in the realm of social history, which I think is a problem because I'm a social historian, but also because I think it gives a better texture of life if you have a better sense of that kind of aspect of how the world worked in people's mentalities. And my guess is she didn't do a lot of that research. I think her research probably focused basically on, like, the Crusades and the Knights Templar.
Okay, yeah, I can see that, definitely.
We then meet Will, who is 14 years old.
No kidding. No kidding.
He and his friend Simon are secretly watching this knight being initiated into the Templar Order, which I guess they're like Templar trainees, basically, and so they're not supposed to be doing that, and they're sneaking around and doing that anyway, as you do, because you're 14.
Yeah, as you do when you're 14 and in the Middle Ages, I guess.
I guess, right? Well, like, no. And again, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, fine, I'm sure 14-year-olds also, maybe did that sort of thing in the Middle Ages, but it's also like, did you look up anything about what, like, childhood or teen years would have been like in the Middle Ages. Almost certainly not.
Will, in general, seems like a very modern teenager as we follow him in this book. It's like, and he's just been transported to this 13th century era, and he's very... And there's other characters as well that feel that way. Exactly,
yeah. And obviously there are some things about teenagehood that are, I guess, biological, like about, you know, when your hormones are kicking in and things like that. But also a lot of them are social, and a 14-year-old in the Middle Ages is basically an adult and would be treated as an adult or near an adult in a lot of circumstances. And the fact that he does not at all act in that way feels somewhat anachronistic.
Yeah. He's very much like his behaviour. He's 14 in this book at the moment, but he acts like, I imagine, like an 8 or 9-year-old of that time would act. Right. You know, a little bit rebellious and a little bit, you know, he's sassing people who are senior to him and that kind of thing. And it did, especially when he meets some characters later on. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a very like modern interpretation of how people would have acted in that time.
Yeah, and of course also the other thing about Will is supposed to be 14 at the beginning. By the end of the book, Will is, I guess, what, about 20?
Something like that, yeah. We go through, there's a few like time jumps in there when it's like smash cut 6 years later, right. And then yes, I think, I believe 20, maybe early 20s.
He doesn't act that much more mature.
No. He really doesn't. He really does not.
Yeah, so that's something of an issue as well, like character development-wise, that he kind of still acts like a 21st century American 14-year-old at 20 as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why I remember him just being 14 throughout the whole book, and I was surprised when we got to the chapters when it skipped ahead, and I was like, wait a minute. Right. I remember him acting later on in the book, like towards the end of the book, the exact same. Yeah. And it just seems very inconsistent that he hasn't grown and learned from the experiences he goes through, which is a lot of them. Some harrowing, some different, some, you know, he goes through a lot and he doesn't really learn from any of that or have personal growth from any of that.
No, he really doesn't. We learn that he has this mentor, Owen, who's his uncle, who seems vaguely disappointed in him, which I get.
Knowing Will for this, 3 pages? I get it. Yeah. I was fully on Owen's side at this point.
I feel like that's like one of the big changes that happens when you're reading books as an adult about teens or watching movies, is that you realize, no, I sympathize with the grown-ups now.
Oh, totally. When I was 16, I would have been like, this is BS. Will's being chewed out for no reason. Why can't he do the things he wants to do? You know, in a pure 16-year-old... I feel we're so restricted by my parents' way.
Right, exactly.
But now I'm like, no, I'm totally on the adult side. Yeah. Like, you're an idiot, Will.
Yeah, I mean, my experience of Little Mermaid is actually like that, you know, I watched this movie as a kid and then, you know, get into my teens and I'm like, yeah, like, they don't have the right to do that to you. Like, teens have rights. And now I'm like, no, go to your room, young lady.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, I definitely relate to Little Mermaid. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm like, listen to your father. He knows what's best. Like, he's just looking out for you.
No, you should not be chasing after some men you don't know.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. But there's a whole conversation related to that we could have.
Yes, but we'll not get quite along that sidetracking. So we learned that Will's father is in the Holy Land as well. We also meet Jacques, who's the other, like one of the other like full-scale Templars, who seems like kind of a jerk, but also you kind of can't blame him. Back in the East, we meet the Sultan, Kutuz, and get the sense that Baybars basically like hates him because he doesn't always want to murder all of the Christians.
Yeah, Baybars is quite like bloodthirsty. Like he's just like, wipe them all out. Doesn't matter what it costs, just go in and wipe them all out. Like that's going to solve the core problem that they're having, which is, you know, that the Franks are in his land.
Right. Especially, of course, because I mean, by this point, they're already sort of on their way out. I mean, Jerusalem was conquered over a century ago. And so it's like, okay, like, chill, dude. Like, you're already winning. Like, you could calm down a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And he also asks to be given the governorship of Aleppo, which Kutuz refuses, so Baybars decides to kill him, I guess.
Yeah. And that's so reactionary. Like, I feel like that we need more background to Kutz's, like, reign and things like that to fully understand his, like, Baybar's motivation, because he's just like, you're not going to give me this thing? All right, I'm going to get rid of you.
Right.
Like, and we're just like, what?
It seems a little like, that escalated quickly.
Yeah. And the fight that they have was very tense. As much as I don't really like how Robyn Young wrote a lot of this, her dialogue I really do like for some of it, and just in the she does really ramp up that tension in there, and you really feel how aggressive and antagonistic they are to each other, but trying to play it under this guise of politics.
Yeah. Even the scenes that are talking scenes primarily feel very action-packed in a lot of ways, and I think this would make a great movie.
Yeah, and I completely agree, especially the first 2 chapters, like, because we're right in the action, and that's very much a movie TV show thing to do, which is cut out all the exposition for most of it, and just put us right in there to interest the viewer. Yeah.
So back to Teen Will. Teen Will is put in some sword match with his friend Guerin de Lyon. Jacques, it turns out, is Guerin's uncle and is a dick.
Yeah, he's a right a-hole. Like, it's just they really push that opinion of him straight up in the, like, with the, what is it, like the second chapter, he was like, boys respond better to the whip than the word, and is basically like, oh, okay, yeah, so he basically abuses Guerin at any point that he's disappointed in him. Cool, great, I guess.
It's one of those things also that, on the one hand, okay, yeah, I'm sure that sort of thing obviously happened, but it also feels very much like it's playing into another big stereotype of the Middle Ages, that basically people didn't actually love their children. And I mean, Jacques isn't actually his father, he's his uncle, but still, he's like his guardian, it seems like. And that's very much this at this point discredited stereotype about the medieval world, that basically because, your kids could die at any minute, you didn't bother loving them.
Yeah, you'd think it would be the opposite, like... Correct me if I'm wrong, like, wouldn't you want to hold them closer and tell them how much you love them? And it's not like love for your children is a modern thing. Like...
No, yeah, and if you actually look at the sources, there are clearly many people who are very loving parents, including, of course, one of the expressions of that is that there are very poignant and powerful laments that people write when their children die. It's, as I said, this very much discredited stereotype about the medieval world, and I feel like that's kind of what they're going for with Jacques, that, of course, medieval, I guess, I don't know, maybe men in particular couldn't possibly love their children.
Yeah, there's a bit of issues with that, with how she portrayed, characters in general, but men also, is that everyone's kind of two-dimensional. The men characters can't show emotion at all, and if they do have them, it's very, wrong, and oh my god, I shouldn't be showing people this, and embarrassing for them. And then on the other hand, the female characters are also very two-dimensional for reasons we'll get into later.
We haven't met them yet. We haven't seen any women. There might not be any women in the world.
Yeah. I know, we'll talk about that, don't worry about it, but it's very two-dimensional at this point, and I know we're only 4 chapters in, but you kind of want a little bit more.
Yeah.
You kind of want, some sort of depth, instead of being like, Jock is cruel and Owen is nice, you kind of want more than that.
Yeah, and the issue I would like to also add with men in particular in this book being hesitant or uncomfortable showing emotions is also a very modern form of toxic masculinity. Because if you read medieval texts, like, men are very emotional and affectionate physically and verbally, especially with other men.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And Robyn has seemed to have disregarded that whole portion of history.
Yeah.
Especially in this time, from what I gather, you could be free with your emotions with other men, and it was fine. Exactly. And I feel like, that you've already stated it very well, but that it's such a modern stereotype for men to have to withhold and be strong at all times and, never access that portion of their personalities.
Yeah, it just very much feels, again, like this is another moment where you didn't read any books, Robyn Young, about social history.
Yeah.
Will also kind of hints at the fact that his father is mad at him for something, but we don't quite know for what, and won't talk to him. And then has this, like, he sometimes wondered if it was worse to have an uncle that mistreated you or a father who wouldn't speak to you at all. And it's like, oh, well, like, stop whining. Like, your buddy just, like, got, like, savagely beaten by his uncle. Like, chill the fuck out.
I know. I was so mad when I read that because I'm like, your friend has just been beaten and you're wondering about yourself. How about you be there for your friend that you can't help his circumstances, at all. But even if he could, what is he going to do? Will's notoriously a terrible person. But it's just like, he's just like, oh, is it... He's just thinking about himself in that moment, and that just made me really mad.
Yeah. We then start to get more of the kind of big picture stuff with the Templars. Jacques has this mysterious meeting with this person, Hassan, and they talk about this Book of the Grail that got stolen. We still don't know that much about it, but we learn that it's a book that would look like your standard Grail romance to most people, but that in reality it has all of this unorthodox stuff about sacrificial rites and the desecration of the cross. And they're worried this has been stolen on purpose to discredit the Templars. And in particular, they refer to there's this group, the Brethren or the Anima Templi, and we don't know who they are, but that they seem to be particularly connected with this book. We also get to see some real people, King Henry III of England and his son Edward, who are about to go to this private meeting with the Knights Templar to deal with Henry's debt to them. And Will and Garin are there, and they see that the Templars request the crown jewels as collateral, and Henry's like, nah, we're not doing that.
Oh, in that conversation, he is so insulted that they would dare ask, and it's like, you got to repay it in some way. Like, they're not asking for money for no reason. They want it for the Crusades and whatever.
Right. And also Henry owes them money.
Yeah. It's just, I would like to know more about that as well. Like, how did that come about? That I assume that he borrowed the money from the Templars for his former Crusades, but we're never really told about that. It's just King Henry owes a debt.
Kings never have enough money.
Yeah. Was that a thing of the time when they just borrowed from institutions?
Oh, yeah. Or institutions
for the Crusades,
individuals for the Crusades, for basic maintenance of their own kingdoms. Like, kings are borrowing money constantly.
Yeah.
Which is a thing that I'll talk more about the details about that in the next section. So you go back to Baybars, who they fought the Mongols again, and I guess they're outside of Aleppo, and Baybar sends a soldier to the household where he once served as a slave, and it turns out that the household is empty, but it had once been owned by a Western knight. So again, kind of implied that probably that was his former master at some point. Oh, and he also just brutally murders a priest at some point. For, no reason, really.
I can't remember the circumstances around that. I think he just finds a priest in a church, just a Christian priest, I guess, and just is just like, you're dead because you're Christian. Like, that's just how it goes.
Yeah. So we got more of that. And we have more of the kind of lead up to him talking about the possibility of an assassination attempt. And it turns out also that Kutuz is sort of onto him and is making plans to get rid of Baybars. We'll see what happens.
That really kind of comes out of the blue as well, because it's just like, Kutz knows that Baybars is unhappy about not getting the governorship, and then he's just like, I like how much intuition Kutz had about this, but it seems to have come around really dramatically when he's like, he was very unhappy. I bet he's trying to go and try to kill me. I got to kill him first. And yes, it's very much a movie plot,
right?
And I guess there's been unrest between Baybars and Kutz for a while, even though we learn later on that Baybars killed the former Sultan to put Kutz into the Sultan position.
Right.
But I would have liked to have seen more of that. We're kind of just thrown into this end of a conflict with those two. A little bit more background would have been nice, I suppose.
Yeah, and it does seem in a lot of ways also her focus is more on the Western context.
Yeah, I wanted to hear more about the Egypt side of it, the Promised Land side of it. Like, there's not that much there.
Yeah, and especially because this is a really interesting history in this period. I mean, we also have these kind of references to the Mongols, and that's never really explained as, like, exactly who they are and where they came from, and how Muslim forces are dealing with the fact that they're now facing both the Christians and the Mongols. Like, it's just, I wish that there was a little bit more with that.
Yeah, I think that is this chapter is the last time we even hear about the Mongols. I could be wrong.
Yes, I think so.
But I think these two battles, the one in the first chapter and this one, this is just all the reference we get. So, and the implication is they're like this kind of animalistic army, you know, native to the land, things like that. But, like, there's not that much information about them. And it's just like, oh, they're just a force that we're fighting. Like, they're just a pure plot device, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Jacques and Garen, meanwhile, are talking before, like, this tournament that they're supposed to be fighting in. And Jacques' like, I'm only hard on you because, like, you're so important and I want to see you succeed. Like, okay.
Okay, Jacques. Like, there's no excuse for that, but all right.
Will then meets the first woman in the world, Elwyn.
Oh my god, I was so excited to have a female character. Right? I was just like, ah!
Elwyn is this weird, like, medieval manic pixie dream girl, basically. She is very, very modern in everything about the way that she talks about, like, herself and how she wants to live her life. And she also really seems like she's there almost entirely to, I don't know, make Will be less of an asshole, but she doesn't even, like, succeed.
Yeah, exactly. She's totally, like, she's put in there to be his mentor and, like, help him grow up, basically. And I really resent that Robyn wrote her that way, especially when she talks further on about getting married.
Yeah.
And she has very liberal opinions about it. And I was like, whoa, like, wouldn't your experience of the time inform you that, yes, like, that is a thing that women are to do? Like, go and get married, make babies, you know, and that kind of thing. And she had a lot of modern opinions about that. And I was like, okay, yep, all right.
Not that there aren't any women who don't get married, but it always drives me nuts the extent to which medieval people seem deeply in shock at just basic medieval norms and the fact that they exist. Like, I could have to have an arranged marriage.
Yeah, and that was it. She was so shocked. She was like, me get married? No, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, girl, that is not an option for you.
Right, like, you are in a society where the vast majority of women either get married or become nuns. So, unless you would like to,
it's like, those are your two choices.
So, yeah, it's frustrating.
But I was so happy to have a female character, finally. Like, we just get to hear about Will and his complaining a bunch, and it's just like, I'm done with you. Like, let's move this along.
Yeah, I wish they'd given her more to do, and I wish she'd become more of a central character than she actually is. But it is nice to finally have a woman, even if she's really there as Will's, as a kind of mentor and love interest, as we'll see.
Yeah.
Will also then enters Owen's room to write a letter, and then finds these kind of references to the Brethren, and is intrigued. And then Henry and Edward are, like, fussing about the crown jewels situation still, basically. And Edward thinks that he can solve this problem. Henry, meanwhile, however, has basically kind of agreed to the crown jewels thing, and Will is one of the people who's going to go to Paris and escort the crown jewels, because they're going to be kept at the Templar headquarters in Paris. Meanwhile, Garen is sought out by this creepy dude named Rook, who then takes him to the meeting with Prince Edward, who tells him that he's going to steal the crown jewels back, and if Garen helps him out, then he'll restore his family name and make him rich and all that good stuff. So Garen agrees, because he also kind of sucks.
Yeah. Our two main male leads, Garen and Will, they're not great. They're great.
Really not.
But Edward does kind of, like, threaten him with his mother's life. Like, he says, if you don't agree to my terms, then I'm going to go to your mother's house and you don't know what'll happen. And it's just like, really?
Yeah, and it's one of those things, again, where women are either not there, or they're there essentially as motivations for men. And so this is a woman that we never see. I'm not even sure we know what her actual name is.
No, I don't think we get her name. I think it's just Garen's mother. She's only mentioned like once or twice, maybe.
Yeah.
And yeah, we do. I don't believe we get her name.
And it's only and she only appears to have the basically threat of her rape and murder be used as a motivating force for Garen to betray all of his friends.
Mm-hmm.
So that's frustrating, especially in a book written by a woman.
Yeah, and this is my sticking point as well, is we'll experience this as we go forward through the book, but I would expect this from so many male writers, but I feel like, I mean, we can talk about this later, but I feel like Robyn wrote these female characters without much agency and without much, like lives. Like, we don't really get a peek into what their lives are like.
Right.
They're just there to be the plot device and the motivation. And that's really disappointing.
Right. And all we know about Elwen is her whole thing that she doesn't want to get married, basically.
Yeah.
They have this tournament, Will wins, and Jacques beats Garen for losing because that's nice. They talk more, and yeah, this is also where I guess Owen and Elwen have this conversation, and she's like, I will never get married. Like, how could you possibly expect that I would get married? What?
Yeah, she's so surprised about it, and Owen's like, nah, dude, like, this is what's gonna happen.
Yeah. Sorry, hun. They go to Paris and are supposed to be accompanying the crown jewels. Hassan, the still kind of mystery man, is also on the boat, and Will's kind of following him, which ends up kind of for the time being, basically not really going anywhere.
No, it was a cliffhanger for the end of the chapter, and then the resolution is just so disappointing. It's just like, oh, okay, sure. But Hassan was someone that was mentioned earlier in the book, and he's kind of mysterious because everyone's so shocked that, like, a brown person could be visiting Owen, and I was just like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
They have to have people there that are not white.
Exactly.
Like, it can't be that, and like, everybody is shocked when he's walking down the street, when he's going up into Owen's office or whatever, and they're just like, oh my god, who was that person? He has to keep a hood so deep over his face so he's not seen. I was just like, calm down, guys. There's no way that this section of the world is pure Caucasian. There's no possible way.
Absolutely not. And, obviously, medieval England and France were certainly less diverse than, say, New York right now. But they weren't entirely white. There certainly would have been some people of color who were present. And at the very least, people would have known they existed. It wouldn't have been that shocking and horrifying to see a brown person walking the street in the way that's implied here.
Yeah, and that's very much in the text. It's not like we're reading into it. It's very much the characters are horrified and kind of like steer your children away.
Yeah.
In that kind of, and it's like, calm down. It's okay. Chill.
And it very much emphasizes his constant vulnerability to attack and suspicion just by virtue of him being a brown person. And that, I think, is really vastly exaggerated in this context.
Yeah, and I mean, it only really sets up a plot point later on, right. And I think that's precisely where she was kind of like, we got to emphasize this every chance we get. I mean, anytime we meet Hassan, which is a lot, actually, it's always emphasized that he could die at any moment, someone could attack him, he could just go mysteriously missing, Owen tells him to be careful when scouting, so everyone is very, very aware of it. And it's not that I don't believe that could have been the case in that time period, but it's just so heavily emphasized that it's like, oh, okay, I get where you're going, Robyn. Like, this is for later on. I see.
Right. But yeah, it is frustrating, and it really does play into another big stereotype about the Middle Ages, that the Middle Ages was this all-white universe, and it's not true, and the use of the one brown character, or the one brown character who is present in Europe in this way, is frustrating to me for that reason.
Yeah, it does really feel like he's the one brown character on the continent. Like, that is how they're framing it.
Yeah, which, no. Baibars and learns about the fact that Kutuz is planning to assassinate him from his friend Kalawan. And that plot, by the way, is just crawling, the assassination plot.
I know. It takes so long to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And this is where it really drags on a bit.
Yeah. And so that entire chapter is just, he finds out that Kutuz is planning to assassinate him. And that's the only thing
I couldn't believe it was a whole chapter on that. It was just Kalawan visits him, tells him of the plan. He gets Kalawan to pay off the governors of Quds so he will have support when he takes the Sultan ship, and that's it. That's the whole chapter. And I was like, wow.
Okay.
Nothing else? We get nothing?
Yeah.
Okay.
The next two chapters, though, we get big drama. So on the ship, Will finds out that Elwyn has stowed away. And then very shortly after, there's a chest and it falls into the water and they're trying to retrieve it. And then while they're busy with that, a bunch of masked men in robes attack them and kill a bunch of people, including Owen and Jacques.
Yes, it was very dramatic. And I had to kind of read this chapter a couple of times because I couldn't really figure out the placement of people and what was really happening. Because they mentioned that the chest falls into the water and they're trying to retrieve it, and this big hubbub about, and at the time I must have skipped over the fact that and I am probably wrong on this again, were the jewels in that chest?
I think at least some of them were.
Okay, yeah, because I was confused about that plot point.
I think it wasn't all of them, but I think maybe the jewels were divided between a few chests and that was one of them.
I mean, I can see that. That's a smart thing to do instead of just keeping it in the one.
Yeah.
But yeah, they bring a chest out from the cabin on the ship after the fight is over, and it mentions that the crown jewels are in there, and I was like, wait, what?
Right.
I thought they were in the water. Wasn't that the whole thing, that they were rolling along the dock and people were trying to retrieve them, and that is at the point where they got attacked.
Right.
And they were playing tug of war with this chest, basically, between the enemies and then the Will's company.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. Well, at the start of the chapter as well, we had that resolution with Hazan and Will.
Right.
Where Will was, at the end of the previous, the chapter 10, Will was following Hazan, thinking he's doing something nefarious, and the start of the 12th chapter is Hazan, finding Will and finding out that he's following him and confronting him, and he's like, I'm just going to go buy food. What is your deal?
Right.
Why are you following me? What are you doing? And then shortly after that is when the chest falls in the water and that all goes on. But that fight sequence I really did like, even though it was a touch confusing, because there were a lot of emotions in there from Owen when he sees his niece, and that's the point where he lets his guard down and is killed because of it.
Right.
And I wasn't expecting Garen to be as upset about losing Jacques as he was. But then...
Right, because Jacques is terrible.
We only know that Jacques was beating Garen daily for faults that may or may not have been within his control. We don't really get much more than that. We know he's his uncle, so we have that connection there, but there's nothing more than that, really. They have one good conversation that we see, which is after the tournament that Garen loses, but it doesn't really inform us on the relationship that much.
Yeah.
And so to have Garen so emotional later on about his death, that he caused his uncle's death, it was really jarring for me. Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense that he cares that much.
Yeah, I don't know if it's kind of like that trauma bonding that Jacques had with Garen in kind of came into play there. But yeah, it was very bizarre for me for him to, and he is so much more upset about it than Will is about Owen dying.
Or at least Will I think is upset, but Will's bad at emotions. Very bad at emotions.
Well, both of them are really.
Yeah.
Is later on we'll see what happens when they kind of talk about what happened and that. But yeah, it was very interesting to read that sequence where there's a lot of things happening. People are fighting. Owen sees his niece Elwyn, who had stowed away in the boat, presumably and I think she might state this outright later, to escape being sent to Bath and marry some random person.
Right.
And yeah, but also Garen and Will were also oblivious to the fact that she was on board. So that's another thing they tackled in that, where Garen defends her from being attacked. And that's when Owen goes down.
Right. That's the other very frustrating thing about her, is that, again, she's like very much a plot device in this scene.
Yes, yeah. She frustrated me a lot in this scene because it's like I don't know. It's just, yeah, her character in general is frustrating because she was only put there to like scream really loudly, and then Owen turns around, sees her, and then he's stabbed in the chest.
Like, she's there to be a damsel in distress, basically. And it's like, she could have just not been there, honestly.
Yeah. And she could have been replaced by literally anybody else. Like, there's no reason for his niece in particular to be there, and that's what frustrates me about Robyn's character development of Eowyn, is that she could be replaced by anybody.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't matter, it wouldn't change the plot at all.
Yeah, it's very irritating. Meanwhile, Baibars finally kills Kachuz and his maid Sultan.
I was so happy in that chapter because stuff happened. Things moved along.
Yes.
And yeah, it was just like, we have a resolution, something has happened.
Then we go back to Europe, where Will is basically being a sullen dick, and Garen is also kind of being a sullen dick. It's just like a sullen dick fest all around.
Yeah.
Will is talking to Robert, who, to be honest, I'd completely forgotten existed until I was looking over notes. I do not remember who this character is.
Yeah, he's here while they're in Paris, and then he's with them later on. But they don't have that much impact, and are only there to kind of, for Will to tell his backstory. Well, Robert is there, and then Hughes, which is his other, I guess, roommate, is there to tell him something dramatic later.
Right.
And that's really the only purpose that they serve.
Yeah. Specifically, we learn that Will's big dramatic secret is that he killed his sister by accident.
Yeah, quote unquote, by accident.
Yeah, so Will just straight up murdered his sister, and then I guess like felt bad about it, and his dad hates him now because of it, which, fair? Sorry,
yeah,
Will.
he's very torn up about this, obviously, and but he's more torn up about the fact, not that the fact that he killed his sister, but that his dad doesn't like him now because of it.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, like, that was his child, that was your sibling, like, there's gonna, like, you think there's not gonna be friction, you don't think there's gonna be tension or anything to do with that, especially the way that she died. He killed her basically because she was annoying him.
Yeah.
And then when he was bringing her body back to the house, he lied to his father about how it happened and then confessed later on.
Right.
So obviously that's going to bring tension as well, because it's like, you're not honest about what happened in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, apart from killing your sibling. So it's, yeah, he's a very frustrating character, and he's like, why does this happen to me? This is all these bad things that I totally didn't cause are happening to me. And it's like, well, hun, you need to sit down and look at your life and your decisions and the consequences, and just take those consequences.
Right. And it's also like the fact that he feels so much worse about his father being mad at him than he does about the fact that he killed his sister. That might be why his father is so upset with him.
Yeah, maybe. Like, it really shows Will as a person. Like, he doesn't care about anything unless it personally affects him.
Yeah.
He couldn't give a crap about his sister dying, only that the fact that his father thinks less of him because of it.
Right. This is also another moment where I find it so frustrating that you have this miscellaneous dead woman who is there entirely to create a conflict that doesn't even really matter to the plot between Will and his father.
Yeah, we only get snippets of the reasoning why Will believes his father is angry at him, and it's mostly because his father, James, doesn't write him as much, and James, we find out, is in the Holy Land and doesn't write to him as much, and he's going, that Will's thinking that silence means hatred, and it's like, maybe reach out to your dad.
I was like, maybe that dude's busy.
Yeah, like, he's busy, he's doing stuff, he's fighting the good fight in the Holy Land. Like, I'm not sure what he wants. It's not like texting now. You literally have to send the letter across continents to get to each other.
Yeah. I find all of that just very irritating, especially because I feel like it would be the exact same book without this conflict between Will and his father. I feel like ultimately it doesn't really matter. I guess maybe it makes sense that he and his father couldn't be like super, super close. But they could just be not super, super close and they haven't seen each other in a long time because he went off on crusade.
This is what I mean about female characters being replaced by literally anything. It could have been his pet dog.
Yes.
You know, it could have been a pet or something and it would have the exact same consequence. Why are you killing these female characters when you do not need to?
Yeah.
And we have so little of them. We have so little female characters in this book. I would love to keep them all, you know?
Yeah.
Like, his mother barely gets a passing mention. We learn her name, which is a big thing.
Right.
But, through flashbacks. But there's no other mention of her, really, apart from being his mother.
Yeah. Will then, because he's sullen and grumpy, goes into a chapel and steals some communion wine and gets drunk. And then gets caught like an idiot. And the priest who finds him, Everard, brings him to the visitor, to one of the kind of uppers of the Templar order, initially intending to expel him. And ultimately then basically decides that instead as punishment, he's going to basically take an extra year before he gets to become a full knight. And during that entire time, he's going to be Everard's apprentice.
I don't know if that is punishment enough, you know,
it seems
for defiling
light.
sacrament.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and just because they found out that Will is James Campbell's son, but it's like, and he does get whipped later for, you know, defiling the sacrament, but it's like, I don't know if that's punishment enough. Like, I think expelling him from the order would have been a sound punishment.
Yeah.
Not extreme at all, which is the way they frame it.
Right, or at least having some, I don't know, kind of heavier, like, act of penance that he would have to undergo.
Yeah, and just tacking on a year for his for him to get his mantle. I was like, I was expecting 10 years, you know,
right?
Like, Everard doesn't bring him to the visitor for like just getting drunk. It's a clear, and I mean, I don't know anything about sacrament or anything, but it was such a clear violation of being a Templar's apprentice.
Right. I mean, it's that, you know, he took the blood of Christ and got drunk on it.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That's not cool. Like, I feel like you get punished more heavily for that. Like, I feel like altar boys in, like, 2019 get punished more heavily for that.
Yeah. There's probably no whipping involved, but it's just like, I really think Will gets off so light and he bemoans so much of his own failings. And it's like, listen, you're a mess. Like, you need to get it together. Obviously, You know it's not okay to get drunk on communion wine. Why are you there in the first place?
Yeah. I don't know, he just feels like this, like, white dude failing upwards.
Oh, yeah, and it was at this point when he got drunk and was caught, and he was like, oh my god, what am I going to do? I was really not liking this character. Like, I wasn't liking him before, but now I'm just like, you're the worst. Yeah. I think I like Garen more than you.
Garen, however, also sucks. Garen is confronted by Rook, who yells at him because he apparently, you know, because he participated in stopping the theft of the jewels, which was all organized by Edward. Garen then, I guess, to save his own skin and his mother, because of course is a woman in peril, he decides, like, oh, I'm going to now betray my order and tell him about this thing called the Book of the Grail that I heard people talking about. That's a big deal. Rook then says, like, all right, we'll see what we can do. Like, you owe Edward a debt, and we're going to probably, like, rape and murder your mother if you don't comply and do whatever we say. We also then find out a little bit, finally, about this Book of the Grail thing, because Everard and Hassan meet and start to talk about who it is that might have stolen it, and we find out that Everard's actually the person who wrote it, under the instruction of the former leader of this group, the Anima Templi, Armand. We also learn that Will's father, James, is the one who wrote that letter to Jacques that we saw earlier, and that he's clearly involved with this whole situation as well.
Does that, like, I only know the Holy Grail from references through movies and TV, but does that track for the 13th century, that's when it was written? And it just seems very convenient that Will's mentor is the one who wrote it.
So this isn't a real thing. I mean, so there
Yeah,
are...
no, I figured
Right.
it wasn't, but, like, is this a thing that's made up for TVs and movies, or is there reference to it in historical documents?
No, there are Grail romances, and that's one thing. And the stuff that's included in the book of this book of the Grail, ostensibly, I'll get to the details of that, but I know where that's coming from. Mm-hmm. The book, however, is not anything that is real or exists.
Okay, yeah. So it's a pure plot device, which, given that it's fictional, I guess I'm okay with.
Right. I mean, then this entire concept of this, like, secret order within the Templars, the Brethren or the Anima Templi, that also is complete fabrication.
Yeah, well, I mean, we see how it's run later on, and I was really hoping it was fake, because it's so badly run, and it's the most ridiculous... just even the origin of the group is ridiculous to me. Right. And Robyn has a bit of imagination, I'll give her that. She's creative.
Yes. I'll talk more about this in a bit, but the early 2000s was really a moment where everybody wanted to think that the Templars were, like, had these, like, interesting, like, heretical secrets. I mean, because this is when did the Da Vinci Code come out?
That was around that time. I think it was 2004, maybe?
Yeah, so it's, like, pretty close in time to when the Da Vinci Code comes out, which also, like, has this whole, like, rigmarole about, like, the Templars are the secret society that are protecting, like, the Holy Grail, and what the Holy Grail is actually the secret of the bloodline of Jesus. Sorry, spoilers for the Da Vinci Code.
If you haven't seen a 15-year-old movie, sorry.
Right, a 15-year-old movie and a, 20-year-old book.
Yeah.
But
both are terrible, don't worry, you're not missing anything.
Exactly. But it's like, this was clearly a moment where everybody wanted to think that the Templars were, like, way more interesting than in some ways they probably were.
Yeah, it was very much... 2006 was a great time for conspiracies.
Exactly.
And everyone loved a conspiracy. Everyone loved the possibility of the Illuminati and really inserting all these conspiracies into historical events to be like, they predicted this in the future and they knew about this. And it was very much of the time. And not in the way that conspiracies are kind of, like, talked about now. It was very much, I'm telling you something that is real. If you don't believe it, you're the idiot. You know, and I do believe that they inserted that Holy Grail stuff in to make the Templars more interesting, because at its face, it's not really that interesting. Like, it's some of the historical events are interesting, but they really inserted the Holy Grail stuff into that story, into that time, to kind of get people interested in that time period.
Right. So the closest I would say that you come to the Grail being something that matters is that this is indeed a period where a Grail romance would be the kind of thing that would be circulating. We have a lot of texts that circulate from this period, which are Arthurian romances that deal with the search for the Holy Grail. There's not this big secretive connection to the Templars in particular. It's just a kind of aspect of vernacular literature that's kind of tying together this Arthurian mythology and basically, like, to some extent Christianizing it by emphasizing this Holy Grail aspect. Mm-hmm. It's all very silly. We've got a time jump now 6 years forward where we finally meet James Campbell, Will's dad, who is hanging around at Safat and is preparing to repel this attack from the Mamluks. And Baybars is Sultan, and he's captured a bunch of Christians from the surrounding towns and is hanging around outside. We then go back to Will, who is now 18 years old. Wait, shouldn't he be older?
Oh, yeah. I must have done the math wrong on that one, because he was 14, and so he must have been 20 now. I swear, no, because I took it from the text, I swear it says 18.
But it also does, I'm pretty sure, say 6 years. I completely buy that they just screwed this up.
Yeah, like, it would not surprise me. I'm actually going through the books right now. The last chapter was in 1260 AD, and the next chapter is in 1266 AD. So yeah, I think Robyn's done a little bit of math wrong there, because it definitely says that he's 18 in the text.
Whoops.
Oh well.
Yeah, well, he's 18 or 20 or however old he is, and
in that area,
right. He's a college kid now. He's hanging with Elwen, who has been a lady in waiting to the Queen of France. they're doing this thing where I think she's like blindfolds him and like feeds him things and he has to guess what they are and like then they make out. So it's fine.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah. They do this sexy food game, which we don't know that it's supposed to be sexy at the start. And we just think they're friends, right? And we don't know that there's any romance there until they kiss. And I was like, oh, okay.
So I assumed there was going to be romance because I was assuming that was the only reason there was a woman in this book.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic, so I was holding out hope she would have agency, she would do things with her life outside of Will and his adventures, so it's just, yeah, they do this game where she blindfolds Will and, like, I think she, like, feeds him a lemon, then feeds him a piece of an apple, and, their bodies get closer and closer together and they kiss, and it's just like, woo!
All right. Again, this would be a solid scene in a movie.
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah. I can see them just scripting it from whatever's in this book. Please cut out all those boring portions about, the lead up to the assassination of the Sultan. But
right,
a lot of this
that
they
whole
could just...
bit could be like 5 minutes.
Absolutely. 5 minutes would be too long, I think.
Yeah.
Get it done in 2.
Right.
Yeah,
we need 2 conversations about this like assassination plot, and then we need the assassination, and then we're done. It's good.
Absolutely.
Will and Elwen are like having this whole thing where Will is being like a whiny fuck because he like wants to sleep with her, but he also wants to be a Templar, I guess.
He's so frustrating for this, because he's like, oh, I want to burn down with you, but my mantle, it's so important to me. And like, I get it, but like, just let her be free then. Just be like, I can't have a relationship. Yeah. Stop stringing her along. She likes you. And he's kind of like ambivalent towards her. He's just like, well, it's a woman that's interested in me, so I guess.
Right.
Like,
and then it's also on her perspective, it's like, what happened with like you not wanting to get married? Like now you suddenly like want to marry like this fucking guy?
Yeah, and I don't remember who, it has to be Elwen that brings up the prospect of marriage. I believe it is. Like she says, just ditch your mantle and marry me and we'll be happy and yada yada yada.
Like, doing what?
Yeah, exactly. What are they going to do? It's not like if he deserts the temple, that's such a big deal. Like, they would have to move across the continent in order to earn a living and, have a house and even get married.
It's just, like, very frustrating. It's also, like, I don't know, I find it irritating that he genuinely does not seem to have any thoughts for even, like, 3 damn seconds about anything religious at all. That he doesn't actually care about any vows from, like, a religious chastity perspective. It's solely like my mantle.
Yeah.
This is what my father who doesn't talk to me wants me to do.
And this whole thing about him becoming a Templar is to impress his dad.
Yeah.
It's so, and he talks about it, I think it's a bit later, he talks about showing up to Safed where James is at the moment, and he's in his glorious white mantle and his father's so proud and forgives him for killing his sister. He doesn't care about his dedication to the church or any of their principles
or anything else.
Aims.
Yeah, he has no morals or goals or anything else.
And it's just like, I find it difficult to understand that that's your motivation to like impress your dad. If you think your dad hates you that much, you would have other motivations for joining the church.
Or like do something else.
Yeah, like he's free to do something else. Like he
try to
didn't have to do this.
Night.
Yeah, I find that motivation very hard to believe.
Yeah, he's very frustrating. He also is like a dick to Simon because Simon got a promotion and then he like finds a Hospitaller, so a member of one of the other military orders, and then is like a dick to him for no good reason. Yeah,
Will's a dick all around.
Yeah.
Honestly. He's just gone around being a dick to everybody, and they get into when he knocks into the Hospitaller?
I would say Hospitaller.
Hospitaller? Excellent, okay. When he knocks into him, he's looking for a fight, basically.
Yeah.
And he's only saved by this other Templar, which was, for me, very contrived.
Right.
And there's no, like... It could have been anybody walking past. It didn't necessarily have to be a Templar, but it's kind of like this Templar, Nicholas, earns his trust in that moment for saving him from an ass whooping.
Well, I guess as we'll find out, it is contrived.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, Baibars is making a plan to attack Svat at dawn. They have this fight. Baibars ultimately is defeated. And, but he does offer the soldiers, I guess he offers the soldiers who are locals, as opposed to Frank's unconditional amnesty if they surrender. See how that goes.
Yeah, it's the local soldiers that the Franks had enlisted to defend the castles, the
fortress, basically.
Fortress, thank you.
Yeah.
And he Baibars offers that, and that's so tempting for them. Like, I get it. Like, he offers amnesty. You can walk away from this right now. You can leave with whatever's on your back. Versus the very real prospect that they will be killed.
Yeah.
For, I'm guessing, a war that they didn't want to fight in the first place.
Oh, right. The experience of people who were local during the Crusades is a really interesting question, because there's pretty good reason to think that even the people who are Christians were honestly not that excited about this whole crusade situation.
Yeah, I can see that, especially those who were born in that land. Like, it's not like they had all travelled there from whatever white country they think they're from. You know, like, some people they're like second or third generations.
I mean, or like forever, basically. Like, there had just always been Christians in that area. They just they never left. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like they just left or they all left or converted when the Muslims conquered the region, which had previously been a part of the Roman Empire at a point when the Roman Empire was then Christian. And so they just had always been there, and Muslim rule is fairly generous to people who are not Muslim. In fact, much more generous than Christian rule pretty much ever is to people who are not Christian. And they seem to have been basically fine. And things are also then complicated by the fact that they are typically not the same kind of Christians as the Christians who are coming from Western Europe, who then don't necessarily like them or treat them as equals or feel good about them practicing Christianity in the way they want to practice Christianity and have been practicing Christianity for centuries, because it's not the way they practice Christianity. So there's actually a decent amount of conflict and complication, and it's very much not as simple the Christians are on the side of these incoming Christians and Muslims are on the side of Muslims and so on.
Yeah, and all of this is lost in the text, because in the book it's written as though it's either you're Christian or you're Muslim, and any Christians who live in the land have only been there for 20 years, maybe? They meet some people in a town later on. I say meet generously, more like Baibars raises it, but the person says, I've been here, I was born here, my parents were born here, but that's the only reference we have to generations of Christians being in that land.
Yeah, which, as I said, is just frustrating, given that we know that there are Christians who literally have been there since, that they probably could not trace them coming from someplace else. There are Christians who live there whose probably ancestors had lived there before Christianity existed.
Yeah, exactly. And but Baibars is very determined just to kill every white person he sees. It doesn't matter how long they've been there, if they're native to the land, if they've come across. If you're a Christian, you're gone.
Right, and that's the thing, too, is that, of course, their Christians are also not necessarily white.
Yeah.
They are Middle Eastern people. There are a bunch of people in the Middle East, and some of them are Muslims, and some of them are Christians, and some of them are Jews, a group that, as far as we can tell in this book, don't totally exist.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, those Christians, Jews, and Muslims who are in and from the Middle East arguably have more in common with one another than any of them do with these Frankish Western Christians who are coming in on crusade.
Yeah, and this is another problem I had, is how does Baibars know who is Christian and who is not? He
certainly would know who the Franks were, not even necessarily because of obvious ethnicity, but because they dress differently. They dress like Western knights, basically.
Yes.
They would be distinguished.
For the native people who practice Christianity, the implication was that he just sought out everybody who was Christian and it didn't matter their ethnicity and just killed them. But how would you know? You know, it's
and unless they're volunteering the information, like, it's not that obvious.
Which obviously you wouldn't.
Right.
I guess that he thinks that if he just eradicates everybody who has anything to do with Christianity in the land, that it will just disappear from the land. And it's kind of like, there's roots there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Baybars needs to talk to a therapist, honestly. He has some issues.
Yes, or well, at least Robyn Young's Baybars has some issues.
Yes.
Everard, back in Paris, is meeting with some knights. The visitor asks this group to seek out and arrest this troubadour who's hanging out for heresy against the church when he comes to Paris. And Everard figures out at some point that the troubadour has this Book of the Grail and is doing this whole, like, performance piece based on the Book of the Grail, which the other knights don't put together because they're not part of the Anima Templi crowds. They don't know what that is.
Yeah, all they know is that it's a heretic book.
Yeah. Everard tells Hassan about this. Hassan is planning, I guess, to just, like, assassinate the troubadour.
Yeah, he talks about scouting him out and catching him between whatever town he was last sighted in and Paris, which, I mean, ultimately doesn't happen.
No.
And I forget the reasons why Hassan failed in that. I think that the troubadour knew he was being followed and went somewhere else. What was, like, holed up by friends or something. But yeah, Hassan's basically sent out to assassinate him and take the Book of the Grail by Everard.
So Will then continues to be a grumpy dick. He runs into Garen and is a grumpy dick to him. And then he goes to talk to Everard and is a grumpy dick to him. And Everard then calls him out for being an asshole.
Yeah, thank God. Like, I was like, someone has to do it.
Yeah.
Elwyn is obviously being too nice and is too caught up in her feelings to do this. And for such a liberal character that Elwyn is, you'd think that she'd be like, cut the shit.
Yeah.
You know, like, just be like anything, but she's always just, like, nice and just is offering him a way out.
Yeah. Then, back in Spot, the Templars and the other Franks are talking with the local soldiers. The local soldiers want to surrender because who can blame them? James is trying to convince them not to. They are like, no. And they take off. Baybars gives terms to the Franks and tells them that they can surrender and go to Accra. But basically, I guess because James knows Arabic, he overhears what the real plan is, which is murder everybody, which is what happens. At some point, he basically says, like, if you convert to Islam, then you'll be good. And James says, nah, and they all get beheaded.
Yeah, that was, I was expecting something to come in and save James at the last minute, and I'm glad it didn't.
Yeah.
Because that was the kind of feeling that I was getting. Like, someone would be like, stop! He's important! Or something like that.
Right.
So, all that tension between Will and James was for naught. There was no reason to focus so much on... And it doesn't inform us anything about Will's character either, except that he's a dick.
But he could be a dick without having tension with his dad and having murdered his sister.
So we went through all of that emotional, I guess, turmoil and about their relationship, and maybe Will will go see his dad and they'll resolve things, and then that it doesn't come to pass. Which I'm kind of glad about.
Yeah, I agree that I'm glad that there wasn't this whole, like, dramatic, heartfelt reconciliation forced in, but it also kind of makes it feel like all of the dramatic tension about Will and his dad and the killing off of the sister was a total waste of time and women's lives.
Yeah, it was a total, like, red herring. Like, it wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
And it's not like it was only 1 or 2 chapters that Will discusses his relationship with his father. It's almost every chapter, and that's his motivation for everything he does.
I feel like the book would have been basically ultimately the same if he had had a perfectly fine relationship with his father and just hadn't talked to him in a while because he was in the Holy Land.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I kind of wish they'd just done that.
Yeah, me too. Honestly.
Garen's having sex with some woman. It turns out that she's a prostitute and runs a brothel, and that's her situation.
And that's basically all the information that we get of her.
We also get that, like, but really her dream is to do something with herbs.
Yes, that's right. She has that, like that potion-making desk in her room, and that's her That's her, like, side hustle.
Right. And, okay, I like that she has a side hustle, because I feel like a lot of women, like lower socioeconomic status women, probably did like work multiple jobs. I do, however, always find it somewhat frustrating that there is this weird insistence that the only job women had in the Middle Ages is prostitution.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
mm-hmm.
not that there weren't prostitutes, and not that sex work isn't work, but there's also like other kinds of work that women did and got paid for. And I don't understand why every single like working woman in medieval media has to be a prostitute.
Yeah, it's either you're married with a husband or you're a prostitute, and there's no like...
Or a nun.
Yeah, and there's no like... There was so many other jobs for women to do that are never mentioned. Like, who's making all your clothes?
Who are the brewers? They're actually in this period like all women.
I agree with you that media kind of like generalizes it so much when you're either one of two things, well, one of three things.
Yeah.
A nun, a prostitute, or a married woman with children.
Yeah. He also is a dick to her, because of course he is. And it's all like, you shouldn't see other men. And she's like, this is my fucking job.
Yeah, I was like, what do you expect, dude? You're paying her for sex, but you also wish that she wouldn't let other men pay for sex? And because he has feelings
and like, what is your plan? Like, are you going to financially support her, dude who is also supposed to become a Knight Templar and not get married?
Yeah, and they talk about how little money they make as apprentices in the first place, because the only reason Garin has money to pay this woman for sex is because of the money that Rook gave him from Prince Edward for his part in the failed stealing the crown jewels scheme. He does mention that his coin purse is getting a bit low or whatever, and that's the only reason he can afford it. So he definitely cannot afford to support her in the business that she owns.
So he's terrible. Rook shows up. It kind of turns out that I guess the plan is that Edward and Rook, with the help of Garin, want to capture or want to get this Book of the Grail so that they can use it as a bargaining chip to get back the crown jewels, because that's still like their thing. Because they can't just like fucking pay their debt. Yeah,
they're just they just need to steal it back to resolve ? Just so they have it. Like, they still need to pay the debt back.
You would think
the Templars are not going to go, well, debt resolved, the crown jewels are missing, like, we don't know who took them, oh well, like, this debt's still going to be there. It's just the bargaining chip's not there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like, they could make the argument, like, you lost my collateral, I'm therefore not going to pay the debt back. But then what? Then, like, the next fucking day, your, like, wife is wearing that necklace that they know was in the, like, box that they had? Like, come on.
Yeah.
What's the plan here?
Yeah, exactly. It's gonna, like, he's gonna have to wear the crown jewels at some point, because he's the king. Mm-hmm. And he's not actually supposed to give the crown jewels away in the first place. That was his argument.
Yeah.
That was King Henry's argument, that, you know, it belongs to them, and, you know, they need to wear it for these reasons, and they should always have possession of them. Yeah, it's going to be totally obvious when he's just, like, wearing them, and they're like, Templars are like, I wonder where they went.
Wonder how you got that.
Yeah.
Elwyn and Will are talking, and Elwyn is like saving up money and wants to like buy them money to go to the Holy Land next year, and like Will's a dick about it because of course he is.
Yeah, his reasoning was that he doesn't want to buy his way into the Holy Land, he wants to earn it, which, like, he's not in any position to earn anything, being so awful. But he, like, free trip, bro. Like, what are you doing? She's offering to pay to go see. You can go and travel with her to the Promised Land and also get your mantle at a later date and then earn it that way.
Right. I mean, but it's also like, God forbid you take anything from a woman.
Yeah. It's just that was the underlying subtext, wasn't it? That he was just like, I don't want anything from you. I need to earn it myself. You know,
but like, you take it from a man, like, come the fuck on.
Yeah, exactly. And he does later on.
Yeah. I hate him.
I know, he's terrible. He's awful.
We also find out that Hassan has failed in getting this book, and so Everard then reaches out to Elwyn and basically, like, comes up with this whole thing that, like, she should go and get the book from the troubadour. Meanwhile, Rook goes and tells Garin that he needs to go and get the book from the troubadour. Elwyn has been promised by Everard that he'll finally let Will undergo his initiation and become a Templar, if she steals the book. So she basically hits on this troubadour dude, Pierre, who invites her up to his apartment to, quote, read poetry.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of, like, complicated, like, maneuvering with a blanket, but basically she manages to, like, take the book and sneak out.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that part with the blanket, because she has the book on her, but she's covering it with the blanket, and previously she'd been drenched in rain, which is why he's like, come back to my place to read poetry. And she's like, I need to keep the blanket. I'll return two to you. Like, I'll send you twice as many and double as comfortable or whatever. And he's like, yeah, okay. But I totally forgot about that part because the maneuvering was so funny to me in that moment.
That also, I feel like, would be a really cinematic moment. Her, like, maneuvering with, like, the blanket and also to, like, not have sex with this dude and stealing the book.
It was very funny to me that he didn't notice that she was like, no, I need to keep the blanket. It's comfortable and I need it. Like,
right.
He was not like, something's going on, you know. Right. He knows that people are after him. He knows that people want the book. He knows that people view it as a heretic and they don't like it and he's being pursued, and he's not clocking for a second that she might be there to take the book.
Right.
I guess he was thinking with a different head or something, but,
yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Which, I mean, you know, she sneaks out, and then the Dominicans come in to arrest him for heresy, and he doesn't know the book, and he's like, oh, there's this, like, hot lady who is in here, and, like, gives them the fake name that Elwyn gave them. She gets the book back to Hassan, and then this is where we get the, like, payoff of our, like, constant, this person is brown, and so everyone's trying to murder them for no reason constantly, and that he gets just murdered by some dudes because he's brown, and then left on the side of the road. And then they find his body and are like, fuck it, we'll toss him in the leper's graveyard. I guess also because he's brown.
Yeah, they were like, well, we don't know what to do with this brown person. We can't put him in the Christian graveyard. That would be too weird. And I was like, what are you talking about? They can't all just be white people in there.
Yeah.
Christian doesn't mean white. I don't understand. And they were acting like it would be so, you know, dirty and you know, they can't put a brown person in there, and it's just like
yeah. And it's also frustrating because, like, okay, so the person who's the king of France at this time, Louis IX, actually, like, brings back converts to France after he goes on crusade, and then, like, settles them in, like, French villages. It seems like basically, like, you know, not that it was, like, always 100% easy, but also they weren't just getting, like, murdered for walking down the street. And they weren't even living in Paris. They were living in, like, little French villages in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Where they, like, probably weren't actually brown people.
The way that Hassan is killed is very frustrating for me. He's just walking down the street and these, like, punks just, like, get up and they're like, oh, my relatives were killed by a brown person, so you must pay.
Yeah, and it's just so random and so frustrating. Also, like, he's the only character who's a person of color who's not, like, kind of evil.
Yeah, exactly. It was so two-dimensional in that way. I liked Hassan the most, I think, out of all the characters.
Yeah.
Because he had at least some sort of depth to him, but we didn't really get that much. We got a little bit of his backstory as to how he came into Owen's employ, but I mean, I really enjoyed his character, but we saw so little of him, which is interesting to me that I have that attachment, which may be why I was so mad when he was killed just for no goddamn reason. Like,
yeah, it's frustrating, and I wish they had not killed him off. Will talks to Elwyn about, like, this whole complicated thing about the book, and Will confronts Everard, who, like, tells Will what's going on. So that's nice.
Yeah, thankfully. Kept in the dark for so long.
Yeah. Then we have this Baybars chapter where nothing is really accomplished, again, because clearly she does not actually know what to do with this character.
Yeah. And
they, like, talk politics, and then his wife and son, neither of whom he seems to like very much, come in.
And that's it. That's, like, the end of the chapter. I think the whole chapter was just around, we need to introduce the son.
Right. Yeah, because there's a whole, like, plan that's going to involve the son that we'll get to.
Yeah.
So Everard then tells Will all of this, like, stuff that I guess we have not actually gotten in full as of yet, which is that there's this group within the Templars, the Brethren, And I guess the Brethren have this, like, secret mission, and that, like, I think we still don't actually get quite in full as of yet, just that, like, they have a secret mission, and they created this thing called the Book of the Grail, and they, like, don't think crusading is cool, I guess.
I'm not sure on that. I know the mission we learn about in, like, the last couple of chapters of the book, I feel like. But, yeah, I never knew really where they stood about the Crusades. I know they didn't, like, give him money to King Henry, but that was about all that we knew.
I think at this point you're already starting to get some kind of hint that they don't think a kind of religiously motivated conquest is necessarily, like, a good thing.
Yeah, I think Everard mentioned that before when he said previously that he thought it was unnecessary to travel or spend that much money or sacrifice that many souls or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hints that he's maybe not on board with these decisions.
And it's like, okay, that's not like it's like the sole reason your fucking order exists, but whatever.
Yeah. No kidding, right?
And so they go and try to get the book, and Garen's sort of spying. Will and Everard go to the leper's graveyard and are trying to find, and they find Hassan's body and find the book. And then Nicholas de Navarre shows up, and he's not a Templar. He's a Hospitaller. What a cock.
Plot twist.
And it turns out that he, I guess, is the one who is behind everything and stealing the book in the first place so that the Hospitallers could make the Templars look bad.
He had some, like, evil villain monologue when he described his whole role in the theft and, like, how that all came about, and I was like, wow, okay. You didn't have to divulge this much, I guess.
Right.
But all we need to know is he's a bad dude, and that's it.
Yeah. Garen, meanwhile, is, like, a couple steps behind, I guess, and thinks Will has the book.
He saw Elwyn and Will talking about the book, that Elwyn, because the troubadour was arrested, she has guilt about that arrest, and she tells Will about Everard's role in that. So that's when Will goes to Everard's office and tells him that the book was taken and where it might be.
Right.
And then Garen interprets that as Elwyn gave Will the book because of her agitation in that conversation, just like her body language and stuff. So he's, like, spying on them. And when Everard and Will leave to go to the leper's graveyard, Garen is in the horse stable and plans to follow them to get the book back, but is knocked out by a mysterious person, which I would assume was Nicholas.
But did they ever actually tell us that?
That Nicholas knocked Garen out?
Yeah.
No, they didn't. They just said he was knocked out, and then Nicholas was following them. And so I just kind of, like, put that together, but it could have been anybody. Was it Rook? It could have been Rook.
I don't understand why Rook would have knocked him out as opposed to being like, hey, dude, tell me what's going on.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was Nicholas. Yeah, because I think Rook knocked him out earlier in the book, and that's what I'm confusing it with.
Right. He just gets knocked out a lot. Whatever.
Yeah, concussions, whatever.
Yeah, so they're trying to figure out what to do. Will finds out about his dead dad. So that's too bad. He's sad.
Yeah, that news was delivered by Hughes, which was Robert's roommate, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's his whole role, was being just a big mouth.
Yes. So it turns out that the Hospitallers, including Nicholas, have gone to Accra, and so Everard's like, cool, we're going to go to Accra, and initiates Will, finally.
Yeah, they do that rushed ceremony, and I was like, how do people have time for this? Don't you have to schedule these things instead of just being like, ring the town bell and be like, get in this church, we're going to do this thing right now? It was, yeah. And then at the end of it, and this surprised me, all the Templars came up and kissed Will on the lips as the end of the initiation, and I was like, whoa, this is awesome!
Yeah, I mean, that's again, like, the thing I was saying before about affection, is that, like, that actually, like, kissing on the lips, like, between men as a sign of friendship was not that out of the ordinary in a medieval context.
Yeah, and I honestly loved reading it, because I'm like, yay! She can show that men have emotion and care for each other without having to be all gruff and, like, withheld.
Yeah, except for Will, because Will sucks.
Yeah, well, Will's a dick. You know, what are you going to do?
Yeah. he, gets initiated and is happy, and then he talks to Elwyn and, says they're gonna get married, but in secret, so he can still, go to the Holy Land and, I don't know, avenge his dad or whatever.
Ugh, it's so bullshit, because it's why waste her time? Why? No one would know about this, so wouldn't they try to marry her off in the meantime?
Right, and it's wait, I'm sorry, you've just, been, hanging out as, the lady in waiting to the Queen of France for 6 years, and nobody's been hey, you want to get married?
Yeah, I think the turnover for handmaidens would be more.
I mean, yeah, the expectation is that to some extent, that's one of the reasons you want that kind of position, is it actually makes you a better candidate for marriage, because it gives, it's you're a good person to marry because you have this link to the royal household.
Yeah, and being introduced to people of a higher status while you're handmaiden to the queen.
Right, exactly. It's a good form of social mobility, essentially. And so it's okay, you're just gonna chill and do that for a while.
Will's plan is, we'll marry in secret, I'm a Templar, I'll go over to the Holy Land, ? Then I'll come back and we'll be husband and wife somehow. There's, it's so flawed from the start. And I'm you're going to make her wait. It could be 10, 15 years you're over there.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm just he doesn't even care about Elwyn.
No.
He realizes, after he's become a Templar, that he does love her and he wants to get married and he doesn't want to be a Templar and blah, blah, blah. But
I really just doing this to impress my dad. My dad's dead. Whoops.
Yeah. It's you haven't thought about this previously. And it's not he was gung-ho, I'm going to be a Templar, I'm going to be perfect, A+ student. He was always just dicking around.
Right. And, but that's the problem, too, with the fact that we have this character whose sole motivation in life is, I want my daddy to like me. And
it's just, that's a really flimsy motivation for this character. He's flimsy on its own, but it's then he doesn't really have a motivation, because then he's just whisked off.
Right, so then for a while he's literally just all right, well, I guess I'm just lost, so I guess I'll just do what this dude Everard tells me, because that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years, even though I don't actually give a shit.
Yeah, and Everard at a certain point gives him the choice to leave or to continue on as a Templar.
It's why didn't you just leave?
Yeah, he doesn't take the choice to leave and be with this woman that he pledges he loves so much. He's just nah, I'll just keep doing this.
Right,
it's
dude,
cool.
You're clearly not into this. Just go.
Yeah. He's just I love you, but I kind of don't want to be here. It's very strange for me, the way they made this relationship.
Yeah. Then in the continuation of how all of the men suck, they have this whole plot. Rook and Garen pass on to Will this message, allegedly from Elwyn, that Elwyn's waiting for him, in Adela's brothel. And so he's cool, we're gonna go bone in, a brothel.
Yeah, he was very conflicted, because he was excited that this could happen, but then he's no, I'm a Templar, I need to be pure, even though you just pledged to marry this woman.
Right. And I feel also he's isn't this a little weird, this particular location? But whatever, I guess.
Yeah, why does he go there? He's so stupid. He's not this is something strange. Maybe I should find her first. He's I'm just going to go to this place.
Yeah. Rook goes to prep for the situation and rapes Adela, which Garen is then a dick about.
Oh, such a dick.
Because clearly if a woman gets raped, it's her fault.
Yeah, it's so... these male characters, I tell you, she couldn't have written more unlikable men.
Yeah, and this is also the other thing, is that, okay, so we have this woman, Adela, who we really know very little about her, other than that, she's a prostitute, but her true calling is, herbs. Mm-hmm. And she, I don't know, I guess sort of enjoys fucking Garen. And that's, her entire character. And then okay, so we have this woman, so I guess since we have a woman who is lower status, we should have her get raped now.
Yeah, I think they use the fact that she owns a brothel and engages in sex work as justification for that.
Exactly, yeah.
It was well, she does this for money, why won't she do this for free under coercion? It's just...
Yeah.
It really shows that 2006 opinion of sex work and sex workers.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's just so frustrating that, she is a character that I feel would have had potential as, this woman who's like clearly like, as I said, I have like some amount of issue with the like choice that like, okay, we can only have working women if they're prostitutes. But like still, even if we like go beyond that, like, sex work is work, and, also has like side hustles because like it's hard to make a living. And like, so you have this character who I feel like could have been genuinely interesting as an example of like a working woman who is supporting herself, a real thing that is true of some women in the medieval world. And then you just have to like have her basically get victimized.
Yeah. And it's total crap, because then Garen is such a baby about it and blames her for being raped. And it's just, he's just thinking about himself.
Yeah.
In that situation, and he's viewing her as property in that moment, that Rook took something away from him. And I'm like, why don't you comfort the girl that you presumably love?
Yeah.
Because that's the whole reason he didn't want her to see other men, is because he loves her and he wants something of a future, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just both of those characters are such dicks in this I was going to say in this section of the book, but I don't think it gets any better.
Yep, it's going to get worse very shortly.
Mm-hmm.
Will shows up. Basically, Rook ties Will up. He tells Garen to kill Will. Garen doesn't want to kill Will, so he has Adela make like a sleeping potion so that he can like pretend like, oh yeah, dude's dead. And Garen then like takes off and like tells Adela that he'll come back for her, which like, sure, friend. Elwyn then has like figured out this whole thing, and she shows up with Simon and a guard, and then Rook runs into Adela and just fucking murders her.
Yeah, like she's turning back into the room to take care of dead Will, and then Rook drags her into a cupboard and just slits her throat and just kills her.
Like,
and I was like,
why? Like, what is
that
the
necessary?
point of this, other than to, like, we have two female characters, essentially, let's kill one.
It's so maddening, because the only purpose it serves is to be motivation for Garen later on, when he learns of this.
Exactly.
And that's it. That's literally it. It couldn't have been that Rook beat her to a pulp or anything like that, Or we could have
had, like, motivation in general. Like, this dude has been, like, manipulating and, like, threatening him for, like, years.
Yeah, and it's not like motivation against the threat of rape and murder of his mother is enough. It has to be, have to straight up murder his love interest now.
And, like, rape and murder his love. It's so frustrating. Like, it's just such an irritating, like, use of fridging into, like, using, like, the rape and murder of a woman as motivation for a man. And it's just a plot line that we see far too much of that I am just so sick of. And especially given that she was such an underdeveloped character in the first place makes it even more frustrating.
Absolutely.
So it's like the only reason you had this, like, manic pixie prostitute in the book in the first place was, like, for this, I guess.
It does come back to the fact that Robyn Young is a woman, and I can't believe she wrote female characters this way, having given a lived experience as a woman.
Yeah, I find it so disappointing. Like, I would be less disappointed if a man had written this.
Yeah, because you expect it. You expect male writers to not have any concept of what it's like to live your life as a woman or a non-man, and really capitalize on the stereotypical actions of that.
Yeah, but it really is just really frustrating to see a woman following those same tropes.
And then Rook goes down, after he kills Adela, goes down and tells Garen, oh no, she's fine, it's cool, you don't need to check on her. And Garen's like, alright, just believes this guy that's been threatening him for years and years, and and he's just like, okay, I guess I believe you, because Rook's like, oh, we gotta go now, like the guards are on our tail, and they just ride off. And I was like, Karen, you're such an idiot. Why would you believe anything this man says?
So then Will, I guess, gets raped. Like, I guess there's just some prostitute who, like, comes up and sees an unconscious man and, like, assumes that he's there to have sex with her?
So there was this whole convoluted situation when, before Adela was killed, there was this, like, rough and tumble customer that she didn't want to deal with that night, and so she was getting one of her young new employees to go and see him instead of her. And during this...
Which is kind of shitty.
Yeah. And Garen put Will on the bed so that if anyone found him, they would think he was just drunk and sleeping. And so there's somehow this confusion when the new employee goes to visit the rough and tumble customer, but ends up in Will's room and just has sex with him.
It's like a weird Shakespearean farce, which doesn't make sense because I feel like if she found him drunk and asleep, she would just not have sex with him and then be like, yeah, no, we fucked, give me some cash.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if he's already drunk and passed out, and he was fully passed out at that point, that's how strong the sleeping potion was, she would just be like, all right, free money. Like,
right.
You know, it's like, you don't... I don't know why she thought, and how that even happened if he was passed out.
So whatever exactly happened, she was at least like on top of him and naked, I guess.
Yeah.
And so then Elwyn comes in and is upset and like takes off.
Yeah. And like in the middle of this kind of like Will wakes up a bit and thinks it's Elwyn.
Right.
That's having sex with him, and he's like, oh, Elwyn. And then Elwyn comes in the room and he sees her and realizes it's not her, but is too like drugged to do anything. Right. And then Elwyn freaks out and then has to be like taken out by the guard that she was with.
He figures out what's happened and is very upset. And Everard's like, nah, don't worry about that. Like, do my thing of going to Accra instead. And he's like, okay.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I need to see Elwyn, I need to explain, I need to tell her what happened, but I didn't know, and I was drugged, and I didn't know that woman, and I was kidnapped there, and all of this. And then everyone's like, no, don't worry about it, we need to go find this guy. And he's like, okay.
Then they're like, all right, there's like a whole thing. They're like trying to get to Accra. They're having a hard time getting to Accra. Meanwhile, like, Nicholas is talking to his Grandmaster, and his Grandmaster is like, yeah, this book on its own isn't really enough to, like, accuse the Templars of anything, so I'm just gonna, like, hide the book over here. So it's also like, okay, so we spent, like, the entire, like, last, like, 300 pages at this point being worried about this book, and now this dude is like, yeah, we're not gonna really do anything with the book.
And Nicholas is like, what the fuck? Like, I came all this way, I risked my life.
Like, I killed people.
All these years I've put into getting this book that I knew existed but couldn't find, because Nicholas was the one that paid the clerk to take the book in the first chapter,
right.
Paid the clerk to steal it.
And then, like, people die.
And then he gets to the Grandmaster and he's like, yeah, well, this isn't really enough, like, we need more than this. And Nicholas is like, what are you talking about? Yeah.
Okay. Will is hanging out in Antioch. He sees Garen and is mad at him. And meanwhile, Bavar's army is also approaching Antioch and is, like, not on board with negotiating because he hates Christians. Then we find out this whole, like, thing that Simon has a thing for Will, which I have very mixed feelings about because it seems like a very, like, half-assed queer representation.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not like you can cast your mind back to their previous, like, conversations between Simon and Will and go, oh, okay, so I'm reading this differently now. It's the exact same. They're just friends that Simon harbours this secret crush for Will. Why? You can do so much better, Simon.
I know, right? Like, Simon's the one who fucking, like, got promoted by, like, actually just, like, not sucking.
Yeah, Simon, I feel like, is a good dude and is good at his job and good at what he does, and why he's wasting his time pining after Will, I do not understand.
Right? And also, like, I mean, dude, there are plenty of men who prefer men who are, like, joining celibate orders. Like, you can find someone else, my friend.
Yeah. Within the Templar faction, there's people there that are into what you're into.
Yeah, like, I'm sure you can find another, like, nice gay Templar man.
Yeah, exactly. Don't worry about Will, who's honestly garbage.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, so they're, like, having this, like, awkward conversation, and, like, Will has, like, no idea what's going on, because of course he doesn't. The Mamluks then attack and reach Antioch, and they're fighting. And so basically, like, we just, like, have, like, a whole battle scene, and then kind of like in the middle of the battle scene, Simon tells Robert that actually he's in love with Will and that he misled Elwyn about exactly what happened, so Elwyn would leave him.
I mean, there's nothing like shoehorned queer representation, I guess. That's in there for no reason, and it also comes to nothing later on. So it's
right.
There's
it's
a lot
like,
in this book that
matter.
I'm like, why is this here? I get like it's dramatic because like at the time, like Will and Garen were fighting against the Mamluks, and they fall under a horse, and there's like the view was obscured, like there was a dust cloud or something, and they're like, oh my god, Will and Garen are dead, and then that's when Simon confesses to Robert because he's like, no, he can't die, I love him, and it's in this massive emotional action-packed scene. But then Will and Garen are fine, and they only lose one person out of their group, which is like amazing to me. I totally thought that like Garen was going to die.
Me too. And I wish he had, because he sucks.
Yeah.
But I guess he doesn't, because then he, like, finally does something, because he's motivated by dead women. Will and Garen are, I guess, like, Garen's, like, forgotten about, like, his whole, like, secret job, and Will and Garen get deputized to go and steal the book back from the Hospitallers. So they do that. But then Rook shows up, and then Rook's like, haha, I murdered her girlfriend. And so Garen kills him.
Yeah.
And then they get the book and run, and then Nicholas is like, the fuck? And then the Grand Master of the Hospitallers is like, let's just not worry about it.
That character to me is so bizarre, because, like, he has evidence against the Templars, which I guess is what he wanted, I assume.
Like, it's indicated that he put Nicholas up to stealing this book in the first place, and then he gets it, and he's like,
It's kind of like it was a hazing prank. It's like kind of like he was hazing Nicholas, because it was like, go do this impossible task that I know you cannot do. See you in 10 years. And he brings it to him, and then he's like, oh shit, you actually did that. I didn't actually mean it. And then the Grand Master finds a dead, mutilated body in his office, and two people have come in to steal the book that Nicholas took so many pains to get, and then he's like, just don't worry about it, problem solved, like, I didn't want it in the first place.
This is so much trouble.
Yeah, he's like, just take the body away. And it's just like, they murdered somebody to get this book. You're not interested in the least about who they are? That's
the other thing that's bizarre about this book, is that I feel like there's just so many plot lines that have so little ultimate payoff.
Absolutely.
Garen's obviously upset because his girlfriend is murdered, who, by the way, like, it's been, like, a couple of years. Has he, written to her and been like, oh, weird she didn't write back?
Yeah, like, you think someone would have taken over the brothel, like, whoever was next in line, or the most senior person, or whatever, and they would have been like, sorry to tell you,
about
but...
that. Yeah, exactly. Like, they give the book to Everard, Everard burns the book, and Will's like, the fuck, we went to all this trouble to get this book. Which, like, I do not blame him for.
I was surprised that he did that too. I was like, wouldn't you want to keep it? But he's just like, nah, just get rid of it. I shouldn't have written it in the first place. And it's like...
I mean, he's probably right. I actually approve of his pragmatism. Well, he, like, wrote it because, like, he had a crush on Armand, and Armand's like...
Oh, that's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah. That was great to read about, when how he described the former... Was it Guardian, or the former leader of the Brethren?
The leader of the Brethren, yeah, because the Guardian is the, like, name for the random secular ruler who's just, like, your person who's, like, associated with the Order, and I think they say it was Richard the Lionheart.
Oh, that's right, they do say that, yes, and but the way that Everard described Armand was amazing, and he totally had a crush on him, and I was like, yeah. I'll cling to any kind of queer culture I can find in this book.
Honestly, that's better queer representation than, like, Simon's fucking crush on Will, to be honest. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Everard finally tells Will that the main goal of the Brethren, this group within the Templars, is that they're going to unite the Muslims and Jews and Christians as one people. I'm sorry, fucking what? Like, best of luck, no one wants this. Like, literally no one. Like, you, like, 7 people within the Knights Templar who allegedly are working for this are the only people who want this.
Yeah, and it's just like, one, how are you going to do that? But two, why?
Like, are you going to abolish religion? Are you going to create, like, a syncretic religion, which clearly no one is going to be on board with? Like, what is your plan? And also, this is ridiculous.
But I love how Everard told Will that he sent James over to the Promised Land to stop the war, and it's like, he's one person. Like,
right?
How is he going to make so much of a difference? And he has this person inside Babar's camp that I don't know if we know about or at this point, that's influencing Babar's for, like, to be, like, amenable to, you know, converging these religions.
And he's clearly not doing a very good job, because dude is, like, around when he just, like, massacres a fuck ton of people.
And he doesn't even say anything. He's just like, okay, I guess, like, this is what we're doing. Like, he's not, like, trying to talk him out of it. This person isn't trying to, like, influence Babar's that much. Like, he's more interested in influencing Babar's son for future rule. And I'm just like, okay, sure, all right.
Lost cause, so I'll worry about this, like, dick kid that he's got.
Yeah, but who's also, what, like 6 or 8 years old? Like,
right, like,
he's not going to come into
plan?
rule for 10 years.
And especially, like, in a lot of monarchies, if you basically are in a situation where somebody's going to, like, become in charge when they're children, they're very possibly not going to be in charge and or alive for very long. Like, this is a consistent problem that happens. So, like, this is, like, a real long con here. If he's like, cool, we're going to wait until this kid is, like, in his 20s and hope this influence situation really works out. And then I guess either, like, what, are you waiting for Baybars to die of natural causes? Or are you going to kill him? Or, like, what's the deal there?
Exactly. And he's and this person who is Colourwoon, I think.
Yeah.
I believe is the person. Yeah. And he's part of the Brethren, and he's trying to influence this kid, which, spoiler alert for the next book, does not work. What's the kid's name? Babar's son.
I have no idea what that child's name is, because he's not a character.
Yeah. Anyway, the child ends up being a piece of shit, which is not surprising at all. But I'm like, Callum, what are you doing? Like, this has been your long con the whole time, and you've still failed at it. You've had 20 years with this kid and have not achieved anything. The way the Brethren is run is so ridiculous, but also fascinating to me.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of people being dumb, everyone is dumb. Will tries to assassinate Baybars and, of course, sucks at it and fails.
Yeah.
Edward, who is the only person who's fucking competent in this entire situation, shows up and he wins his long con in that he, like, I guess manages to get appointed the guardian of the Brethren.
Oh my god, when that happened, I was like, are you kidding me?
Like, oh my god, are you fucking kidding me? Especially because, like, and this is something I'm going to talk about more in a little bit, there are so many reasons that the future Edward I is, like, literally the worst goddamn choice for this.
But also, I still don't understand the point of having a guardian there.
I don't either.
I guess I think they mentioned earlier in the book that it's to keep the Brethren from having too much power.
But they already don't have any power. They've accomplished nothing in their, like, century of existence.
Yeah, and the whole thing about that was they went to war with the Hospitallers. I still can't say that right. Years ago, and there's this whole dramatic scene that we completely skip because it doesn't mean anything to the book anyway. It's just like Nicholas's motivation for fucking over the Templars. And then after that, they had a guardian to prevent that from happening again. And it's like, guys,
why?
Why are we shoehorning this in? Because it's supposed to be like, oh my god, like, Edward's in on the Brethren, that he's been fighting to, you know, not overthrow, but, like, dismantle from the inside, and maybe he'll have the opportunity to do it now because he's, like, double spy, and it's, for fuck's sake.
It's just dumb.
Yeah.
Garen also has been, like, thrown into prison, and then Edward finds him and is like, nah, let's, like, still, like, be buddies. I want to, like, keep hiring you, because he's done such a good job for the last 7 years.
Yeah, I know, like, why wouldn't you just leave him in there to rot? Like, he's been arrested because he left Paris with Rook
right,
to get,
like,
the Holy Grail back and all that crap, and it's just, and because he deserted his duties, yeah, and it's like, why would you enlist this guy? He's obviously terrible at this job and is not on your side, even when you threaten his mother with rape and murder. Like...
Yeah, but so for whatever reason, he's like, nah, I want you, my friend, to like continue to be my employee. Okay.
I guess it's the only reason for that is because it gets Garen out of prison.
So then he can be a character.
Because Prince Edward like gets him out of prison. He's like, he's just going to be your secretary for something. You know, he's only going to be a Templar in like an administrative sense. Which I don't even know how that works, but okay.
That actually makes more sense than anything else, because there are like admin people who work for the Templars and are technically Templars, but they have actual jobs that matter and know what they're doing, which Garen doesn't.
Yeah.
Simon, I guess, tells Elwyn about the whole situation. And so she shows up, and I guess they're going to get married again.
Yeah, they're like reconcile, and it's this whole... Simon sent Elwyn a letter saying, you know, how he lied to her about what happened and what really happened, and so she comes to reconcile with Will, and I'm like, you can do so much better, girl! Mm-hmm. What are you doing? Don't travel all this way to meet this piece of shit dude who abandoned you and lied to you and... You know, it's just... Simon would have been so much better just not telling her at all.
Exactly.
Let her live her life.
Exactly. And anyway, then the like 5 fucking seconds after she shows up, he's like, so cool, I'm gonna ditch and go to Caesarea to deliver this treaty to Baybars.
Yeah.
So he goes to do that and like meets Kalawun, and they're like buddies, I guess. And they like talk about his dad, sure.
Yeah, because Will at this point knows that Kalawun was the informant on the inside that's part of the Brethren, and like tells him this in front of people too. He whispers it, but it's like silent when this is happening. So it's like people can hear you.
Right.
Like, what are you doing? Why are you saying this?
They have this treaty which will last for 10 years, 10 months, 10 days, and 10 hours, which basically lets the Franks like hold on to what they're currently holding, and they like won't fight for a bit. Will asks to go to Safat to bury his dad, and Baybar says sure, and then that's just like the end of the book. There's a lot of loose ends. I guess that's why there's 2 more books.
So I have the resolution for 1 that we'll get to, but I don't think I have, like, I read the series 10 years ago, like, between that time. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember anything about the other books. And I went looking through the second book to see if it had a resolution for us that I knew you were interested in, but I couldn't really see anything else. So I'm not sure how that plays out. I'm going to bet that none of them get resolved. Our questions never looked at again. She's just like, yep, cool. I only imagine that there's going to be more questions that we'll have if we ever do a second or third episode with this series.
And it's like, okay, I hope, my friend Robyn, you become a better writer over the years. If you have become a better writer over the years, her new series has like so many plot threads that like I could barely follow by reading a summary, or like that I could barely follow by reading the premise. And it's like they're going to like so many different places, and there's so many different things going on that are like not actually connected that I assume now you're trying to connect. Man, like, do you have a plan for that?
I actually cannot wait to read the first book in that series just to see what it's like. Because it's either going to be a hot mess or it's going to be refined from what this book was. Because she has to have grown in her writing. Like, you can't go backwards from here. There's no possible way. There's only forwards. So I'm very very interested to see what that first series. I got to look up this summary because it's going to be batshit because it's so many things all at once.
Yeah. Speaking of how this book is sort of batshit, that is a good opening to deal with the next segment, Vera et Falso, where we talk about what she got right and what she got wrong. And there are certainly things that clearly, like, she did research and she based on real life events. It opens with the Battle of Ain-Haluth in 1260, which is considered to be the beginning of Baybar's rise to power. The bloody massacre after the 1268 siege of Antioch is a real thing, and also the young Prince Edward's involvement in the Ninth Crusade. So there's clearly, like, stuff, especially on the military end, that she clearly, like, did her research and got more or less correct. I'm also very relieved that she got the Templar cross right, a basic thing that they could apparently not handle in the movie Kingdom of Heaven.
I have not seen that movie, but I'm I'm not going to seek it out, I don't think.
I don't recommend it. However, there's a lot of things that I feel like she took a number of liberty, that like she clearly did research but took a number of liberties and omitted things that I think might have been important. With Baibars, there's like little details, interestingly, that again, she clearly did research. So it talks about how he had this cataract in his eye that like made his eye weird looking and like was like a star. Like that's a real thing, like that he had. But she presents him as this basically like creepy sociopath whose defining motivation in life is his hatred of Christians, which doesn't seem entirely reasonable or fair. He's clearly somebody who was ruthless and who wanted to assert Mamluk power and authority. But his choices seemed, I would say, much more pragmatic that they're presented as being. When he acted with particular ruthlessness and massacred people and went back on treaties, it clearly is coming out of, I would say, concern about the function that those particular places have had as bases for Frankish power. And there are other cases in which there are Christian garrisons who surrender and are spared. It's not like this is just a thing that he always does. And so I find that a little frustrating that he's presented as just hating Christians to the exclusion of pretty much all other motivations. I also just want to share a fun fact that I learned about Baibars that I wish had been in this book, which is that apparently the dude fucking loved cats.
I love that. Oh, why? That's such a missed opportunity.
I know, and like established like a cat sanctuary that was quite well funded in Cairo.
Oh my god, I love Baibars.
Which is
amazing,
adorable, and I really wish that we'd had like Baibars like hanging out with some cats in this book.
Oh, that would have been so great.
Like it would have been a nice like humanizing of the man. He doesn't even like his wife and kids. It would have been nice to like see him like, I don't know, hang out with a cat.
Yeah, and not just be like this bloodthirsty person the whole time.
Then of course there's Henry III, Edward I, and the Templars. One of the things that is a bit frustrating at the outset of that is that it's very focused on there being these tensions between the two and of them like hating each other, which is vastly exaggerated. It also, I would say, very much oversimplifies the relationship that the English royal house had with the Templars. The Templars function, and I'll talk a little bit more about this shortly, but as bankers as well as general creditors, and it's not that uncommon for people to basically just like leave funds in deposit with the temple. So like they owe them money, but also like if you're at all like concerned about security, like leaving the crown jewels with the Templars is actually a pretty good move.
Yeah, because at least they're safe then, like...
Right. One of the things then that Edward does, which is very questionable, is that he seizes a bunch of funds that are left in deposit with the Templars, some of which are actually his, but some of which aren't even his. They belong to a bunch of miscellaneous English nobles. And he's just like, nah, your shit that you left with the Templars, I'm just going to take this and use it for my stuff.
Cool, Edward.
Yeah. And the other thing with Edward in particular that I find so frustrating is I have a constant concern and question in a lot of medieval media about, like, where are the Jews? Because the Jews just, like, do not exist in so many things where the Jews should exist.
They should at least exist in this book. We are in Jerusalem. We are in the Promised Land.
They should very much exist in these places in the East where there are significant Jewish populations. They should also exist in England, where the other group that the Royal House of England is deeply indebted to is the Jews, and who they are also very heavily taxing as another way of getting themselves some money. And Edward I, person who for some reason they appoint as the guardian of a group within the Knights Templar to foster religious harmony. This is the dude who expels the Jews from England.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It just bothers me so much.
The whole appointing Edward as the guardian in this book was straight ridiculous.
Yeah. In addition to the queer representation being bad as representation, I also find Will's obliviousness frustrating, in that it really seems to imply that nobody in the Middle Ages had ever heard of gay people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
not true. People knew. It's not an identity exactly in the same way as it is now, but they knew that there were men who preferred to have sex with other men.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a shock.
Yeah, there would have been space for that.
There would have been Edward I's son being pretty into that, probably.
Yeah, you know, like, for Will to be like, oh my god, like, it's very, yeah, it was very disconcerting that Robyn framed it in the way that, like, gay relationships are a modern thing. Exactly. And it's like, no, we've had centuries and centuries of history of this. Yeah. How could you not include it?
Yeah, and one of the various accusations, in fact, that is brought against the Knights Templar, which I'll get to shortly, is specifically an accusation of homosexuality as being rampant within the order.
I mean, like, Robyn, you dropped the ball.
Which is very possibly true in the sense that it probably was true at, like, any, I would say, probably almost any, like, all-male social context in the medieval world.
Yeah, like, it's for Robyn not to include this part is ridiculous to me. Yeah, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, so it's just like this very, like, frustrating, again, like, half-assed queer representation. I'm gonna, like, stick in this character who is gay to, like, say I have queer representation, but he doesn't get to actually have a relationship because he's chasing after this man who not only is, as far as we can tell, straight and in love with somebody else, but also is just completely oblivious even to the fact this is what Simon is interested in.
Yeah.
I would say another kind of big issue throughout is that there's a lot of just heavy modernism and anachronism in the way people talk. So we've talked about some elements of this already, but it also is something that, like, shows up, I would say, even in there are details that she throws in that are correct, that she clearly did her research. They're just not how people in the medieval world would have framed things. So that Babar's description of the Franks, for example, that he's like, oh, so though in Acre, those the people called the Franks held the power. It was the term used broadly for the fighting classes of the West, whatever their nationality. But the two things the Franks had in common were their Roman Christianity and the fact that they had come to the East uninvited. It's not wrong, but it's also not a sentence that I can ever imagine a 13th century Muslim man saying.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of examples of that.
That did feel like one of those things that she pulled out of, not that it existed at the time, but out of a wiki. Like, she was like, okay, this sentence explains mostly everything, but also it doesn't explain anything.
There's also a big modernism problem in terms of how she writes women, that in addition to, like, all of the problems with how she rates women, they don't even have agency, and yet they still have to talk in ways that implies that they have these very 20th or 21st century ideas about gender. Is that, like, everyone has to be like, I have the right to not get married. It's like, you don't think that. Like, come on.
That's not, her experience at that time, but also historically, like, that's not an opinion that a lot of women would have had. It's just like, this is my role. This is how things are done.
Right. And I mean, the sense that I have in a lot of ways is that I think there probably were a number of women who didn't want to get married. And I think they probably then, like, transitioned into expressing that in religious ways and saying, like, I really like to be a nun.
Yeah, exactly. That was your get out of jail free card. Like, I don't want to marry this guy and pump out a bunch of kids. I'll be a nun. That's great for me. But it wouldn't be like, I'm not going to get married.
Right. Or you, like, marry somebody and he's, like, 70 and then he dies. And then you're like, oh, I'm so sad about my late husband's death. I could not possibly marry again.
Yeah, precisely.
And so there certainly were women who preferred not to marry or who, like, really enjoyed widowhood, which was kind of the dream. But they didn't, like, express it out loud in that way. Mm-hmm. And so I find very frustrating the, like, insistence on the only way women can have any agency or be considered at all, like, relatable is by basically giving them these, like, 21st century opinions and ways of expressing those opinions.
Yes, yeah.
And yet, even despite that, they still don't really have any agency.
Yeah, that was, like, her only agency was saying this, and then it's just like, nope, that's done now.
Yeah. Then, of course, there's the anima templi, which, in addition to not being a thing, is also not the way really anybody thought about anything in the medieval world. This is another frustration that I have with how people talk about the Middle Ages, is this insistence that people could only be relatable if they have these very modern, rationalist, pseudo-atheist ideas about religion, that, like, we're going to, like, end religious division and, I guess, like, consolidate all the religions into, like, one and not have different religions. Like, what? No one would think of that idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's very much a modern spin on how to come about with world peace, is just unite everybody under this big umbrella of religion, and then we're cool.
Right.
It's like, that's not A, is obtainable, but B, like, how?
To the extent that that's an idea people would have had in the Middle Ages. They had that idea. The version of that idea that they had is, oh yeah, we'll have peace, and we'll end religious divisions by having all of you convert to Christianity. Surprise, motherfuckers.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's the medieval version of that. Is like religious unity through conversion.
Mm-hmm. Not through negotiation, through you are this now.
Yeah, exactly. And then in practice, that doesn't even actually work, because then they're like, oh, I'm not sure you're a real Christian. Yeah. But, like, that's how Christians, and for that matter, Muslims essentially see, like, that's how you have a unity of religions, is that you convert to our religion. And not that the Jews were any better, they just, like, never were ruling anything. But, like, nobody wanted that kind of religious unity and peace. I mean, even the Jews, who are a group who are not ever in power in the medieval period, are very much engaged in an extremely vitriolic, certainly anti-Christian polemic, to some extent anti-Muslim polemic, but they like the Christians less. Like, I was talking about this with my students recently, who were really shocked because I was telling them about this text, the Toldot Yeshu, which is an early medieval anti-Christian polemic, which is basically a retelling of the Gospels. And in it, their response to being accused of being the killers of Christ isn't to say, no, we didn't. It's to say, yes, we did, and that dude deserved it. And, like, that is very much the medieval mindset. Like, nobody wants everyone to all be friends. It's very much a deeply modern, like, concept. And it's very much, I think, coming out of, and we talked about this before, this real desire to see the Knights Templar as being this kind of secretive order that has some, like, exciting secret mission. And this then leads into the next segment, the Historia et Veritas, where I talk about a real historical person or event. And I want to talk a bit about the Knights Templar and how, like, honestly, they're just not as interesting as people think they are. Is the short version. So the Knights Templar, they're just a military order. That's just what they're for. They're for prosecuting the Crusades. They do have a complex initiation ritual. They have some amount of secrecy. It's very hard for me to think that there's any possibility of there being anything particularly unorthodox or honestly progressive in that, given that one of their very early supporters and the person responsible for helping to create a lot of this is Bernard of Clairvaux, who is a deeply Orthodox Christian figure, who is a saint, who engages in a lot of anti-heretical and anti-Jewish preaching. I mean, I just don't buy that like this group that Bernard of Clairvaux is really involved in is doing anything so fantastic or so essentially unorthodox. To some extent, I would say the most interesting thing about the Templars, and the most, in some ways, progressive thing about the Templars, has nothing to do with anything secretive or religious or dramatic. It has to do with economics. That they got a huge influx of donations, they became very wealthy, and ended up actually increasingly having a lot of members of the order who are non-combatants who are involved in basically financial management. So the Templars are basically a like hedge fund / bank for a lot of their history. That like they have a ton of money, they have people who are Templars whose job is managing money. They increasingly then get deposits from rulers and other people who just are trusting them to safeguard their money. They're also getting a lot of deposits from crusaders and pilgrims who then are basically saying, okay, I'm going to give you my money in France, and then you're going to give me a letter of credit so then I can have money and take out money from the Templars in Jerusalem. And so that's like the most like interesting thing and like different thing that the Templars are doing that's like new is like banking.
That's so great, considered how movies, TV, and games and fiction really frame the Templars for being this like secret order that does all these like secret missions for whatever end, but you
like they're just a bank.
I never knew they were just a straight up bank. Like,
yeah, it's like they're just like, they're not that dramatic. They're just a bank.
yeah.
And it's actually banking, which is probably really their downfall. Because so they're lending out a bunch of money, and one of the people to whom they're lending money is Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair. This is fair as in, like, sexy, not fair as in just because he's definitely not that. Because so Philip's habit seems to have been that he just borrowed a lot of money from people and then is like, nope, you're out of here. So he does this with the Italian moneylenders based in France, that he borrows a ton of money and then is like, nope, you'll have to leave France. He does this with the French Jews. He borrows a ton of money and then is like, nah, y'all are expelled now. And he does this with the Templars. And then ultimately, with the assistance of Pope Clement V, who's a pope who's based in Avignon at this point, and so essentially they're pretty much under the control of the French king, the two of them working together then collude to make all of these dramatic accusations against the Templars that they're desecrating the cross and worshiping idols and engaging in homosexuality and financial fraud, which is probably the one of all of these most likely to be true, or maybe also the homosexuality, but not any more than any other order. And so they're accused of all of these things. A number of high-ranking Templars confess under torture. Based on the strength of this, the order is ultimately formally disbanded in 1312 by the Pope. And the thing that's actually then the kind of like most like secretive and fun and weird about the Templars, and that I think gave rise to all of these myths, is first of all, like these accusations that in some ways seem to have come out of nowhere, especially if you're not thoughtful about this political context. And it's like, oh, were they doing these like creepy heretical things? And then the other part is that, and this is genuinely kind of cool, is that according at least to legend, the Grand Master of the Templars, Jacques de Molay, when burned at the stake in 1314, yelled out basically that his adversaries, Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V, would both die within a year, and then they did. So it's legend. It's very possible that like somebody came up with that legend after the other two had died.
Yeah, very coincidental that. But...
yeah. But it certainly is something that I think probably contributed to this kind of legend surrounding the Templars as like maybe there is something like a little weird or magical or mystical going on with them. I think they're interesting, but I mostly think they're interesting ultimately as an economic historian. And I think it's really funny in a lot of ways that there are so many conspiracy theories surrounding this group that in many ways is like very just like pragmatic and normal and just like wanted to basically like have money.
They just want to be bankers. There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. I mean, like maybe there is because of capitalism, but like they're certainly not like doing anything especially like secretive or like heretical. They're just a bunch of dudes who want to like fight some wars and have a bank. This is something we've already touched on to some extent, but our next segment, Fabula Nostra, is one in which I have us kind of think about how might we maybe create our own version of this story, basically that we like better.
I think we've kind of written our own story as we've been talking about this book, because I don't want Will, I don't want Garen, I don't want any of that perspective. I want to know about the female characters.
Yeah.
I want to know their backgrounds. I want to know how Adela came to own that brothel, and obviously she's going to live in this version, and going forward from there. And then you kind of got like Will's and Garen's adventure on in the background. But I want to know basically about all the women. I want to have that alternative book where it doesn't involve, like Will's in there, sure, as a passerby, and Garen's in there as a former customer that ended up getting arrested for ditching his duties, you know, and all of that. But it's just, I want to know about, if we have to centre on Will in some respect, I want to know about his mother, I want to know about his sister, I want to know, because there was another baby born after Will killed his sister.
Right.
I want to know about her and what happened with that, and how is the mother dealing with the fact that her husband has now been killed in fighting the good fight. And I just want all of that. And it's such a generalization for what the book would be about, but it's hard to center on specifics when we're not really given specifics about these women. Like, we've got Elwyn, which she's going to ditch Will altogether, obviously, and go and live her good life, you know, and Adela running that, and running her brothel and everything that comes along with that. But it's just... that's what I would really like. Make them more than two-dimensional. They're not even really two-dimensional. They're like one-dimensional in this book. You know, I want some depth. I want some adventures. I want some conflict. I want, you know, something interesting to happen that's not focused on Will being a dick and Garen being a dick and Jacques being a dick. You know, it's just... anything. Give me queer representation. Give me Adela ends up opening a same-sex brothel. You know, like, give me any of that.
Adela's like, fucks Garen because Garen's paying her, but, like, maybe there's a nice lady in the brothel who's really who she's into.
Yeah, exactly. Like, give me that little bit of, like, romance and conflict and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I would love it to just be about Adela, but... we have to have certain characters flow in and out around that. I would read the shit out of that book.
I also spent some time, because this was so cinematic, coming up with what my casting might be for a movie, although a movie that I would probably write in some ways very differently from the book. And I think it is very telling. The actors that I came up with for Elwyn and Adela are actresses who I think, like, actually, like, do a pretty good job of playing some badass women. So I was thinking actually Brie Larson could do a good Elwyn who has more to do.
Oh, absolutely. She would rock that role.
Right? And I was thinking Alicia Vikander as Adela. And so I think that would be a lot of fun. And I also, inspired by having seen Little Women recently, Timothée Chalamet plays Laurie as basically this kind of, like, obnoxious fuckboy, and he sucks.
Perfect for Will, then.
Yep, so I'm thinking him for Will.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also the eminently, like, pathetic and hateable Alfie Allen, aka Theon Greyjoy, as Garen.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect casting.
And then the people I want to actually be, like, the men who are more central is I actually would like to have the movie... have Jeremy Irons as Everard and Idris Elba as Hassan, and them actually working with the women to accomplish their mission, and the men, they're like, ugh, fuck, I guess we have to, like, occasionally use them for something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's training Will on the side, and he's like, I can't stand this dude.
And he's like, Elwyn, can you just get this dude out, the fuck out of my hair for, like, an hour? Just please. Like, do a dumb food game with him. Like, I don't care. I just cannot deal with this child.
Oh, that's so great. Oh, I would watch that. Oh, that would be so great.
So I think that would be fun, is if I adapted this into a movie, but made it completely different from the book.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to rewrite it. There's no way this could land now if we took the core of what happens in this book and put it into a movie. You just basically start from scratch.
Yeah.
Keep the central characters that you like, and then start from scratch.
Yeah. For our last main section, Estimatio, how would you rate this movie on a scale from 1 to 5, using whatever criteria you'd like?
This fictional movie or the book?
Oh, sorry, rating the book. This is only the second time I've done a book, so I just keep forgetting.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I was going to rate your fictional movie 10 out of 10 already, because I love that casting.
The book that we read.
Yeah. The book, I mean, when I was looking through our notes before, I was like, like a 2.5 out of 5, but now I think it's a solid 1. Yeah. Like, I didn't realise how much I disliked a majority of the characters, a majority of the plot, a majority of anything that happens, and the lack of moving forward. And I didn't realise how much I disliked all of that. So I'd probably just give it a 1. Like, this is a book that I straight up loved when I was a teenager, but I think that's really indicative of my mindset at the time and just clutching onto anything that was historical fiction.
And that we've all, like, grown as people and become more aware of the ways in which certain of the kind of things that we've talked about are really problematic.
Yeah, there was I was going into this book completely oblivious of a lot of social issues and things like that, and it was, so this was all new to me, and having, preconceptions that were formed from watching TV and movies about certain things like sex work and stuff like that. I was like, oh, okay, sure. But now I look at it and I'm like, oh, we've torn this book apart for being how bad it is, and I don't feel guilty in the least.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go with a 2, which in part is going to stay that high. This is my way that I'm going now, is that I gave El Cid a 1.5, and El Cid, after I rewatched it, I'm like, this movie is basically fascist propaganda for the Francoist government. And so I feel like I have to give this book higher than I gave El Cid, the work of Francoist propaganda.
I suppose if you grade it on that sliding scale.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like...
So on the virtue of it not being literal fascist propaganda, it's getting a 2.
High praise. High praise.
Not fascist propaganda, raves Sarah F. Decker.
Oh, I'd love that to be on the cover.
Poor Robyn Young. I hope she never listens to this podcast.
I know. When we started this, I was like, oh, it'd be cool if she listened, but then I'm like, no, never do it.
Oh, no.
You will walk away a broken woman. We have torn it apart. And I'm sure she's lovely and has grown her writing, but... I have so many issues with this book.
Yeah, my one other podcast episode thus far that I've done on a book is on a book that genuinely I think we both came out with wanting to. I can't remember exactly what score we gave it, but it was around a 4 or 5, and we genuinely liked it. And I was like, I want you to be on my podcast one day. But I hope Robyn never listens to this. She might be upset.
Yeah, sorry girl if you're listening. We love you, but this book is not our cup of tea.
Sorry. Maybe the new one's better. Thank you so much for coming on and joining me to talk about this.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time. I'm so glad we were able to finally record, because it's been 2-3 months we've been trying to get a session, and there's always something that came up, and we eventually just chalked it to Templar curse.
Yeah, so hopefully the Templar curse is now at an end, and this episode will be released with no further problems.
Yeah, I think to ultimately resolve it, I have to burn the book. That's what has to happen.
You'll have to burn your copy, because I can't burn mine, because I read it on a Kindle.
Oh, no, yeah. Please don't burn your Kindle. I'll burn my copy for both of us.
Okay, I can ritually delete it.
Yeah. The evil's been released. We're free.
Yes. So where can the listeners of Media-eval find you on the internet?
A lot of the listeners will probably already be my Facebook friends, which is great. Hi, girls, I love you. But I have an Instagram, but I don't update it that much. My username is floofle.love, FLOOFL.LOVE. That's probably where you can find me if you have questions about this episode or things that I've dropped that I forgot to talk about later on. Yeah, I have a Twitter, but I only use it to tweet at podcasts, so it's not very interesting.
And yes, and shout out to our mutual friends in the Moon Cult. They'll know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
And if you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app. It should be available on all of them. And rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and I will read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval and join our Facebook group. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah F. Decker. If you have any questions or suggestions, I also would love to hear from you at mediaevalpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to Media-eval. Bye!
Bye!